Good morning, and welcome to Grace Farms. My name is Alina Marquez Reynolds, and I'm the Foundation's General Counsel and the Deputy Director of the Justice Initiative, where we work with our partners and our collaborators to combat all forms of human trafficking, gender-based violence, and wildlife trafficking. And we do that through outreach, advocacy, and training. Today, we are especially honored to welcome the UN Population Fund, UNFPA, and their director, executive director, Dr. Natalia Canaan, to this special place. Grace Farms is a place with a purpose. It's a place that serves as a bridge between people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different experiences, and different countries. And it's a place where we can come to actively listen and to learn from each other. Now, I know I may be a bit biased, but I can't think of a more perfect place in the physical world to have this program about violence in the virtual world, where we can come together and shine a light on the problem of online violence against women and girls, and where we can come together to think of solutions to counter that violence. Before we get started, I do want to distribute some thanks. I'm going to start with our partners, UNFPA, and your amazing team. It's been such a pleasure to work alongside all of you for the many, many months of planning this program. And we're just delighted that you're here in person and joining us from around the globe. I also want to thank our home team, without whom we couldn't do these programs. You make us all look good. I'm going to start with my justice team. You've been working day in and day out with our partners and with me, and your can-do attitude, your collaborative spirit is amazing, and it makes it a pleasure to come to work every day. So thank you, Katie and George and Miriam and John and Rod, our director, who couldn't be here today. He's in Thailand at another convening, but he's here in spirit, I know, and he's probably watching online, even though they're 14 hours ahead, but hopefully he's watching. So again, the other team members who are behind the scenes making us all look good, our production team, our events, amazing events team, and our IT department, all of it, facilities, Chef Nina Perez, who brought us the delicious beverages and snacks. All of us work together every day to further this mission, and it is a pleasure to be here. We're also thankful just for today, for the extraordinary speakers from across the United States and across the globe who have taken time out of their very, very busy lives and days to participate in today's program and to lend their expertise. For all of you, we're thankful for all of you for joining us here in person and virtually. So let's get to it. It is my great privilege to introduce our leader and the woman who had a vision for this special place and who made it a reality, and who had a vision for the purpose of this place, and who every day gets all of us to work together to further that purpose and that mission. So please welcome my boss and our founder and the CEO of Grace Farms, Sharon Prince.
Good morning and welcome to Grace Farms. Thank you, Alina, and to those around the world that are working to end gender-based violence and to accelerate a more equitable world. This is very important work. It's really the kind of work that takes all of us to collaborate, and that is what was happening today. On behalf of the foundation, I do welcome you to Grace Farms on this foggy day, which is quite stunning and beautiful, right? And it's also one that we're going to be able to lift. Hopefully, I can even see it starting, right? Starting to lift the fog on something that is rarely considered and taken and boldly taken hold of, right? So we are a new kind of public place. We are built to be this nexus for the public and private sectors to come together to address very pressing humanitarian issues in this hopeful space. We're embedded in nature for this significant justice work. And you can see it's in the hopeful space that we can also create more grace and peace. Our stake in the ground is to end modern day slavery and disrupt gender-based violence. We are thrilled to partner with you for the UN Public Fund. And we also are here for this, really talked about the issue, the virtual is real, this program. And especially a warm welcome to you, Dr. Natalia Canaan. You're such an esteemed director, executive director, and we have an immediate understanding of the capacity to really accelerate the transparency and accountability to what is being perpetuated online. So I can't wait for this to be the beginning of much more to come. We are, as part of our mission, we do our part to prevent violence against women through training, outreach, and advocacy, and by applying a multidisciplinary lens. So those of you out there that have participated in programs before know that we regularly convene top experts across various sectors and this open space to share ideas, to create new perspectives, and then to create new outcomes. So we are led by career investigators and prosecutors like Alina, and our team does apply a victim-centered and trauma-informed approach across our strategic priorities. We're championing the inclusion of survivor voices and perspectives, which is very important. And one of the fundamental barriers to equity in the world is proximity to issues and people together. In year one, we convened the UN with the UN University and about 125 multi-sector public-private organizations to address modern slavery in areas of conflict, the most brutal, and published a report for the UN Security Council to consider, which ultimately ended up with the UN Security Council Resolution 2331. Right from the get-go, our Justice Initiative team's extensive law enforcement expertise initialized and has been training law enforcement around the world, working with social service providers and companies how to address human trafficking and forced labor in their work, of which 70% are women. Our investment in architecture met our commitment to end modern day slavery 2 years ago. It was actually 2 years after we opened, and we identified a gaping hole that the largest industrialized sector in the world is construction. It's also at the highest risk of forced and child labor. And it still is getting a fair labor material transparency pass. Sort of stunning, right? So you think about it, first it was food, then it was clothing, and next will be shelter in terms of the building material supply chain. So Design for Freedom is a new movement that we're leading with 80 industry leaders, practitioners, activists, artists, manufacturers, deans within the ecosystem of the built environment to remove forced labor from the building material supply chain. We're aiming to create this radical paradigm shift to address and eliminate this egregious human rights violation of which women are absolutely part of, like I said, 70% of the issue. And today we focus on gender-based violence and proliferation online. We focus on this issue because it is unfortunately ever present. No community is immune, yet we can empower law enforcement and government agencies, not-for-profits, and coalitions on the front lines, media, local, and national leaders to effectively and collectively reaffirm that women's rights are human rights and to speak up for those whose lives are threatened by violence. So we believe in collaboration. We want to create these pathways forward, and we want to include the survivors of violence to apply these lessons learned and to ensure access to justice. And we do look forward to this productive day ahead. We are pleased to partner with you, UNFPA, and to host so many incredible speakers who will share their experience and expertise to raise awareness and promote accountability. Key word, we need accountability, and we can all work together as we counter this online hate and violence, which no doubt contributes to the spike in violence against women and girls around the globe. So today we are going to focus on ways we can all learn from each other and ways we can work together to prevent violence against women and girls in this entropic, damaging, real, but virtual realm. Thank you for joining us. And it's now my privilege to introduce Dr. Natalia Canaan, the Executive Director of UNFPA.
Distinguished participants, dear colleagues, dear friends, buenos dias, grace and peace. That sounds like a beautiful theme for us as we gather here at the beautiful Grace Farms. I'd like to thank Sharon Prince for her vision and for her leadership in joining us together to explore how we can share a commitment to ending digital violence once and for all. On behalf of UNFPA, the United Nations Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency, I'm really grateful for your participation all around the world. So important, so timely for us to forge a path forward together. Just last month, on November 15th, I announced the world population reaching 8 billion. At UNFPA, we work in over 150 locations around the globe, trying to ensure that all 8 billion, but especially the half of the 8 billion who are women and girls, will be able to exercise their rights, their choices, and to realize their full potential. Technology is at such an exciting juncture. It is transforming lives. It's creating a world of infinite possibilities. It's offering women and girls opportunities to learn, especially online post-COVID, to grow, to share, to connect with peers, and to participate in economic life in public and political spheres. The other side of the coin, however, is that technology can also facilitate violence and abuse against women and girls, whether it's online on social media platforms or offline through recording or GPS devices. Technology-facilitated gender-based violence can be devastating, and it can happen to anyone, anywhere, including in the privacy of your own home, your own bedroom. As the title of our event indicates, the virtual is real. Gender-based violence in all its forms is real, and it is a human rights violation. It's a violation of a person's right to live free from harm, and is yet another patriarchal tool that is used to silence women and girls, to stop them from enjoying their right to express themselves, and to be vocal about issues that matter. Speaking with UNFPA, and I've just come back from Gujarat in India, a woman called Vijayita described online attacks against her as, quote, organized attempts to shut down the voices of women who are vocal in her community. Yes, all women and girls have the right to be online. They have the right to use technology free from fear and intimidation. And we cannot accept another layer of disadvantage and discrimination against women and girls. Research that was done by The Economist is showing that as many as 85% of women and girls online have reported witnessing digital violence, and nearly 40% have experienced it themselves. Young people, particularly vulnerable to online harassment and abuse, with all of the mental health consequences. 58% of girls reporting that they've been abused online. And this risk is multiplied for members of the LGBTIQ+ community, for activists, for women of color, for people with disabilities. Digital violence can cost women their careers, their health, and sometimes even their lives. And yet when violence and hate is delivered digitally, it's too often dismissed. A reporter Nistula told UNFPA that when an anonymous attacker threatened to rape her, she reported the incident to the police, and yet because the threat was delivered via Twitter, it was met with indifference by the authorities, and this is unacceptable. Thankfully, calls for action are growing louder. Countries such as the United States, Denmark, Canada, Kenya, to name just a few, are coming together. They're prioritizing, they're preventing and trying to address online violence. And we do welcome the establishment of the Global Partnership for Action on Gender-Based Online Harassment and Abuse. We are proud to support that partnership as a member of the steering committee and as a co-convener of the advisory group. And UNFPA has launched the Body Right campaign in line with the 16 days against gender-based violence, when we orange the world to say, stop gender-based violence now. UNFPA, through the Body Right campaign and petition online, created a B symbol, much like the C in copyright surrounded by a circle. And we want this to be a symbol of empowerment, so women and girls, everyone, can claim ownership of their own image online. So I'll close by quoting you one of my most favorite proverbs, and it says, depend upon one to count to two. As part of our shared efforts to end digital violence, we want to highlight diverse voices and experience. This affects everyone, everywhere. And that's why your presence here today is vital. We need your leadership where you are, where you're working, where you are leading. We need your expertise, and we certainly need your creativity. Depend upon one to count to two. Can women and girls depend on you? Can we depend on each other? I say yes. Together, let us stand up for women and girls and for everyone to be able to claim their fundamental right to live free from violence and to have agency over their bodies and lives, both on and offline. Thank you so much for listening.
At this time, I'm going to call up Hera Hussein, who is going to engage in a conversation here with us, virtually with our guest speaker, the Honorable Tina Jutton, who's going to join us virtually in a moment. So we're just going to set up the stage. You give us a moment. Just need a chair. And while they're doing that, let me just introduce Hera. Hera is the founder and CEO of Chain. This is a global nonprofit that creates resources on the web to address gender-based violence. Chain's multilingual resources was designed with, not just for survivors, and has reached more than 500,000 people. Hera was raised in Pakistan and is living in the UK. And she knew from very early on in her young life that she had a passion for tackling the issue of violence against women and making change. She believes in using the power of open source technology, trauma-informed design, and hope-filled framing to solve the world's pressing issues. So let's welcome Hera Hussein to the stage. We're so very thankful you're here. And joining us virtually, she was going to be here, is the Honorable Tina Jutton. She is a survivor. Tina is a young member of the parliament in Mauritius. Prior to being a parliamentarian, she was employed as a lecturer at the Open University of Mauritius. She's a youth and gender advocate, and she supports this cause. She also lives it. She's a survivor. And today she's going to tell and share her story of being a survivor And she used that experience to make change in her country in Mauritius by bringing together, one led to two, and making change in the laws and policies of her country. So we will welcome the Honorable Tina Jutton virtually, and I will turn it over to Hera, who will work with her to share her story today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. We have Honorable Tina Jutton with us. Before we start, I just wanted to open by saying that when we talk about gender-based violence, we're tapping into pain, whether that's our pain or we're listening to someone else's story of pain. And it's really important that we not just hold space for it, but also hold space for our own emotions and what it may bring up for us. So if anything, at any point, you hear something that makes you feel like you are overcome with emotions, then please, look after yourself, whether that is switching the live stream off, walking out of this physical room, going on your phone and looking at a picture of your cat, which is exactly what I would do. Anything that gives you that momentary relief. So do take care. And I'm really honored to welcome Honorable Tina Jutton, who is part of the Parliament of Mauritius, to talk about her story and also share with us just the reality of why virtual is real. And Tina, can we just confirm that you can hear us?
Hi everyone, Hira, I can hear you, but I can hear you really distant. It's a little problem with the sound.
No problem. I have been gifted with a loud voice. I will shout. So I wanted to invite you to tell us about not just your experience, but also explain to us and really bring it to life for everybody who's tuning in, that when we say virtual is real, a lot of people still think there's the online world and then there's the offline world, and that these are very separate. But we know as activists and survivors and policymakers that is not true. The lines are not clear. And in the way that you experienced that technology facilitate abuse or tech abuse, I think you'll be really clear for people about why, what is the physical impact of experiencing something that was online. So first of all, I want to just welcome you to share your story, but also just say that we're very honored that you're taking this act of bravery and sharing what happened to you with all of us. So thank you so much, and please do share and tell us about yourself.
Okay, thank you, Hira. I tried to listen to you. I hope I captured it correctly. So first of all, allow me to extend my warm greetings to the whole audience who's there, and first of all to Grace Farms Foundation for inviting me to be part of this event, which means a lot. I just listened to the CEO, Sharon Prince. Thank you for believing in this cause and creating that safe space where you said it, I think just before you, Alicia said it, where you can actively listen and care and learn about each other. And again, my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Natalia from UNFPA for the amazing work that she's doing, and again, standing up today to support this cause. So coming to my experience, yes, Hira, if I go back to, as you said, about what I felt, so I can tell you, being quite newly elected, which was, I'm new in politics. I'm the youngest elected member in government in Mauritius. So we got elected in 2019 and full on blown in 2020, 2021, we were affected by COVID, and we were affected by, of course, a lot of other issues, like I'm sure you know, the work issue. So we were focused on trying to make a difference, on trying to do work, on trying to do something which will make the lives of others better. But I can clearly remember that day where I was in my room. I was looking at the ceiling, trying to see the ceiling, but I couldn't see it because my eyes were so filled with tears. I was drowned in tears, and I was in excruciating pain because I remember the physical pain itself, because I was holding myself and trying to digest what I just saw, because some friends just shared with me that there were pictures of me. I mean, some people made unauthorized use of my face as a picture to make animation videos online, and animation videos with pornographic content, made up stories, and link ups with all kinds of people who are actually in politics. And that was devastating, because I think you would understand, coming from Pakistan, coming from conservative cultures, and I am from the Hindu origin, and especially striving to make it up, trying to work against stereotypes, and then suddenly being hit by this glaring reality that people are actually attacking your very dignity, which is the most cherished jewel for a lady, be it irrespective of, I think, of culture, of country. So when I got the video, when I saw that, I literally went breathless. Like I couldn't breathe. I felt I was choking. And of course, as I said, the pain, the excruciating pain of seeing your pictures being used in such, I would say, derogatory way. And I couldn't continue seeing it, because I started thinking, what will other people think when they see me? Through which lens we will see me? So that was my first instinct. That was my first reaction. And I let myself be shattered in that moment, because I felt torn. I felt I had let that affect what I was doing. So during that one night of sleepless night, I would say, because I could not find sleep, I was thinking and thinking. First of all, there was denial. I couldn't accept what was happening to me. And I was questioning, why me? Why is this happening? And why did they choose me? And why are they attacking me? Because I understand being trolled, being new in politics, but all politicians are trolled. Many young girls are trolled. People make fun of you, maybe because of what you wear, maybe even because of your looks. But this is one thing, and tolerance and acceptance is one thing. But being constantly targeted, harassed, and being a victim of what I would say online violence, this is something else. And I could feel the violence, because I could feel myself being subject to this weight overwhelming me. And yes, so I had at that moment different kind of thoughts. So the first thought was, why me, and how would people see me? And then after some time, I started to think, so why is it I chose politics? And what is it I am here for? So I come down to my very mission, which is actually my life purpose. So I chose politics to be able to make a difference, and to be able to make a positive difference in the lives of people. Now, when I become faced with such an obstacle or a barrier, or even as I would say, like it's like a dagger hitting at you. So what do? So then I took a lot of time to be able, first of all, to accept, because I said I was in denial. Then I accepted that it's happening. And then I tried to think, what can I do about it? First, for myself, to be able to get out and come out of this. And second, to stop this from happening again to other people. So at that moment, I decided not to let myself be the victim of the circumstances, and to try to come out to make a difference, because that wound that I have, I would say even a physical, emotional, mental wound, that it is traumatizing to see this. And I also have to share, because I live alone with my mother, who is also having issues, health issues, being a patient, also having anxiety issues and panic attacks. I couldn't share it with her. So that's why I isolated myself. I closed myself in a room to try to find out and decide what to do and how to react. And so at that moment, this is the choice that I made, that I had to do something about it. So that's how I went out the next day. That's how I approached my government. I have to say I got the government. That moment I got the support of the government, of the prime minister, of all my colleagues, and also to go ahead to file what you call the police complaint, etc., but which could not help. And you know why? Because the people who do this are unfortunately dastard individuals who have a very malicious intent. So they hide behind fake profiles. So social media like Meta, Facebook, they allow people using fake profiles. So these people having fake profiles, posting something on social media cannot be tracked. They can even change their IP address. So they could not be tracked. And till today, we are still trying to be able to track them. But there was no law at that moment. There was an old Computer Misuse Act, which dated 2023, but which did not reflect any of the social media and any of the realities of today, of the millennial and today's Generation Z. So what we did was actually to come up to, first of all, to see what are the issues we are facing. My case was one instance. There can be many others like me, maybe not in the limelight, maybe not public figures, maybe not even coming in front, but whose pictures are being used, who are actually being victims, who are actually facing even, I would say, even more dangerous thoughts, because it is the fact that for many young girls, like I know the case of young girls whose pictures went on Telegram, they even thought about suicide. So this is why we decided to come up with what we call the Cybercrime and Cybersecurity Bill, and even the Emerging Technologies Bill in Mauritius. So in Mauritius today, I have to say I'm very happy that we've been able to put up the Cybercrime and Cybersecurity Bill, which now makes it an offense to make such kind of comments or posts or come up with content which is not moderated, which is of derogatory nature, which affects the dignity of other people, and also which can cause harm to the, even to the, it can cause jeopardy to the national peace and security, because some people can even post things with communal intent or to create differences or to also try to create divide. So the law came up with all kinds of these instances where you can actually put it that it is an offense. And since it is an offense, it is then being punishable by law with fines, with penalties, with imprisonment terms. And today the law is passed, we've been able to do that. But I have to say that that moment was definitely an eye-opener, because for me it was like, what is it I can do? What is it I can do to prevent other young girls from feeling what I'm feeling right now, from also being subject to possible future attacks of this sort. And it was not easy, because you have, especially to be able to bring a legislation, there is a long process, which I will not delve into because I know we have a time constraint. But just to tell you that where there is a will, though, we have, where there is that will and that unity to do something, then things can be done. But I wish to say that today, we may not know how many are suffering in silence, or how many people are still being trolled online, or still being, their pictures are being used without their permission, or we don't know whether there are still fake profiles uploading videos of young girls out there. So this, I was talking for Mauritius, and I don't know in the world as well how it is at the moment, but I really hope that together as one voice, with the UN, with the UNFPA, with today Grace Foundation, we can actually be together to raise our voice to, for instance, first of all, have a kind of sensitization for those social media companies like Meta to own up to the responsibility. I will not delve right now into the whistleblowers' statements, but it is a fact. If we have to think about the ethical responsibility of companies,
That's a
versus
really-
profitability.
I wanna say
So
that's a really,
maybe
really
I have to
important-
end now here. Yeah.
No, I want to talk to you more. And I think that I just want to say that that was a really important message at the end about both how, Tina took a personal struggle and then did something about it. And also you touched upon the point that, something like image-based abuse affects, so many people, and it'll affect different people in different spheres of life differently. So for politicians about, discrediting them and like really targeting and their dignity, and also discourages women to go into politics. It puts pressure on families of women who are ambitious and want to enter politics to be like, no, don't do this. To those people who are everyday women and girls who don't have access, and maybe their threat isn't how far their images go, but just the harm that they experience from that is still very visceral and vicious. So thank you so much for covering all of that. I know that you are a very strong and inspiring woman, and I want to end on a note from you about what is it that has given you hope through all of your struggle in getting those in dealing with what happened to you, but also helping others in that position, in getting that laws and policies passed, and like where you stand today. What is it that drives the hope inside you?
Okay, so what gives me hope is UNFPA, is the Grace Foundation today, is this space together that we have right now, that safe space that we are creating, that we're building on, to be able to speak about such issues and to be able to support each other and actually come up with even more supportive mechanisms, even legislative procedures together. So this is what gives hope. Coming to my story, what gave me strength at that time, again, I would say, is when you were going through the down times, you have to find the strength from within. But because why? It is easy to become a victim of circumstances, as I mentioned earlier. But we have to try to think what is important to us and what is it we want. So for me, I realized, why is it I am in politics? That was my life mission. So if I have to say something, and what gives hope and what is really hopeful today, is that when people know there is a cause they believe in, like today's cause we all believe in, you are here talking about it, I am here talking about it. Dr. Natalia is here from UNFPA talking about it. We have such a huge audience there. They're all here today taking out their time because this cause is important to us all. So this gives us hope. So I believe that when we know what is important to us, what is it we want to contribute to, then there is hope. Then because we can all come together to make something about it.
Well, that is a really, really good note to end on, because I feel like you said you give us hope. And I just want to say from everybody who's here that just hearing your story and how you've dealt with this and how you've powered through that change gives us hope. So thank you so much for all your work. And to all the survivors who are listening to us, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hera, and thank you so much, the Honorable Tina Jutton, for sharing your story. We have a number of wonderful speakers who are going to be on our panel, so I'm going to call them up to the stage now. Hera Hussein is going to moderate the conversation. We also have Imran Ahmed, who is the CEO and founder of the Center for Countering Digital Hate. We have Professor Susie Dunn from Dalhousie University. We have Nina Jankowicz, who's Vice President of the Center for Information Resilience. And we have Luna, who's going to be joining us virtually. She works with Plan International USA's Youth Advisory Board. And also getting the award for traveling the furthest is Ileana Silva, who joins us from Uruguay. She's the Communications Officer for Derechos Digitales. So welcome, panelists, and I'll turn it over to Hera again.
Three. Okay, you're four. Great. We're gonna get there. That's okay.
Thank you so much. That was a fascinating talk by Laura Bates. Laura's book, Fix the System, Not the Women, is excellent read. I highly recommend it. And I want to welcome the entire panel and also Luna, who's joining us virtually, and we can all see you, Luna. And I'm going to invite each of the panelists to share a little bit about their work and when we, and what are the kind of things they're bringing into this room in terms of how you look at technology facilitated abuse, how does it show up in your work? What lens are you using in thinking about either prevention or tackling or analyzing? And you all have really fascinating angles. So I think it'll be really interesting. And at the end of this panel, we also have a chance for you all to ask questions, whether online or in person. So we're going to keep some space for that. So if you can all, share a little bit about what you're doing, that would be really amazing. And I'm going to start off with inviting Imran to share with us more about Center for Countering Digital Hate.
Hi, my name is Imran Ahmed. I'm Chief Executive and I'm founder of the Center for Countering Digital Hate. We started in the UK, really working in 2016 after the murder of my colleague, Jo Cox MP, mother of two, during the EU referendum by a man called Thomas Mayer, who in part had been radicalized online by disinformation and hate, and that scarred that campaign. But we are now a US 501c3. I'm based in Washington, DC, and we operate around the world looking at various types of hate and disinformation and how they disfigure our democracies and also progress. I have some brief remarks to start, if that's okay. And so why this is important to us and why digital hate in particular. One of my heroes, Eric Ward, who's the founder of the Western States Center, one of his greatest, most well-known aphorisms is that the original sin of white supremacy is anti-Semitism. It provides the symbology, the othering, the disinformation that creates the driving force for white supremacist violence and hate as an ideology. But for digital hate, it's misogyny that's the original sin. It's the creation of division, the positional relative subjugation of women, the partisanship, the rapid ideological evolution, and the nature of the ideology itself, which Laura really brilliantly explains every time I hear her speak. But these are core to digital hate. Digital misogyny has changed traditional atavistic hate groups. So think about, for example, the Proud Boys, which are a Western male supremacist group, not just a traditional neo-Nazi white supremacist, but misogyny is key to it. It's because digital environments provide an opportunity for convergence, for cross-fertilization, for hybridization of ideologies, because these spaces are force multiplication environments in which you can send as many messages as you want to as many people as you want for absolutely zero cost, zero marginal cost for every additional message to each additional person. It is, in one respect, like the nuclear bomb of communications, the creation of unlimited amounts of communication energy from virtually nothing. And we simply haven't understood how it is being weaponized by bad actors, and in particular by misogynists. It's provided a new lexicon. We see new pseudosciences emerging every day. Presentation of Western birth rates as being of declining Western birth rates as being a product of feminism is a particular aspect that underpins a lot of the different types of problems and violence against women and girls that we see. It's created strange new alliances. We've been studying Islamist Jordan Peterson fans recently, which is fascinating. And you think about Andrew Tate, the misogynist who says that, the former multiple martial arts guy who is now a ISIS supporter. There's 5 types of violence against women and girls that we look at: trolling, incels, male supremacism as an ideology that's promulgated across multiple different aspects of online spaces, the undermining of sexual and reproductive rights for women, and self-hatred as well. The inculcation of feelings among women that they should harm themselves by both bad actors, but also by bad platforms. Our next report, which I can't really go into detail on, comes out next week. And it will look at the way in which self-harm and eating disorder content is being algorithmically amplified into the feeds of young people around the world today. And it is the most disturbing report that we've ever produced. I think what's really important to me as we come out of today and as we enter today, and I hope that's something that we come out with, is that we can't just look at this through a traditional law enforcement, counterterrorism, counterviolent extremism lens, but also through a user experience and an epistemic lens. We are immersing our kids and ourselves in an information ecosystem that lends itself all too easily against violence against women and girls. You think about the life of an 11-year-old girl today. She'll be told to hate herself. She'll be told that she's a second-class citizen by the boys who are being inculcated in male supremacism. She puts herself at risk of violence every day just by being a woman, because there are communities of incels which are not lone actors, which are highly active, densely interconnected networks of men who absolutely fundamentally believe that it is their core human right to be able to rape or hurt women. We are allowing for a counter-enlightenment, a movement that pushes women back, atavistic misogynies combined with new digital forms of expression and organization that put at risk women and the progress that we've made over centuries, really. And I very much hope that this panel can be, start of that, another step in that work of countering the counter-enlightenment that we see today in digital spaces. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We should all look at the report that you're mentioning. And also, there are 2 points that I picked up about what you said. You mentioned disinformation. Often we're so used to hearing about disinformation or misinformation in terms of politics, but there's a gender disinformation as well. The image-based abuse that Honorable Tina Jutton went through, that is gender disinformation. It's to discredit. It is, that is the way these different forms of oppression intersect are really important when it comes around tech abuse. Another thing you mentioned was birth rates falling in the West. Really, it's a very, very insidious conspiracy theory. There's an element to it as well, and also xenophobic element. It is the kind of argument not just used to talk about, how feminism is just like ruining families, but also about how migrants, especially Muslim migrants in Europe, which have higher birth rates, are basically trying to take over and invade Europe. So then you start seeing that actually these threads around gender also intersect with racism, with Islamophobia. It's all connected. Thank you so much for those remarks. And I'd like to invite Susie Dunn. We have an assistant professor from Dalhousie University with us.
Right.
So I'd love to know more about, how do you see these problems?
Yeah, well, thank you so much first for inviting me. It's so wonderful to be on this panel of really intelligent and wonderful people. I'm a law professor, so I mostly look at this from the context of law, and so look at a variety of civil and criminal responses. But more recently, I've been working with the Center for International Governance Innovation, and we've been working on a large global survey about people's experiences across the globe. And from the research that we've done, we've just seen that there's such a diversity of options available to women depending on the countries that they're in. And there's also varying forms of tech-facilitated violence depending on a country a person is in. So, for example, in North America, we see a lot of things around, the intimate images being released without consent, and that causes great harms. But there's other countries where there may be even more patriarchal control over women, and even things like pictures of women being engaging with men in public spaces, or having pictures of them dressed in a way that might be considered inappropriate, perhaps not wearing a hijab. These types of images can lead to extreme harm and even death in some circumstances. So we're starting to look a little bit more of the cultural differences globally for what women can experience. And from a legal perspective, there's such a vast difference depending on the countries that you're in. We're seeing countries like Canada and the United States and England developing a lot of laws that are specifically related to tech-facilitated violence. But in many countries, a lot of the harms that we're seeing aren't actually prosecutable. So you can't, even if you go to the police and you report them, there's not actually specific laws related to the types of harms that people are experiencing. And so there's quite a bit of need for changes when it comes to legislation in countries globally. especially because this is such a cross-jurisdictional issue. And so depending on the country that you're in, certain laws may apply and may not. And then the person who's actually causing the harms might be in your jurisdiction or may not be in your jurisdiction at all. So there's a lot of complications when it comes to accessing justice. And the research that we've done for CG has really shown that people want a multitude of solutions. And I think right now there can be a bit of a focus on calling for criminal laws. And I think that there is an important space for creating practical, useful criminal laws that states can respond to. But often women who are experiencing tech-facilitated violence, they want a variety of options. They want to be able to go to their family and friends and find support from their family and friends. But right now, what we're finding is that people don't know what technical solutions are out there. They don't know even necessarily how to use the content moderation options that are available on social media companies. So there's a real lack of education about how to get help, even from a basic technical standpoint. And then there's also the challenges that Laura was speaking about, where there's still a lack of recognition of some of these harms actually being harmful. So I think there's a major space for a change in law, but also a space for a change in education so that people can actually understand that these harms are actually causing difficulties to people. And I thought the title of this presentation was really excellent. You know, this concept that the virtual is real, because this idea that what's happening to us in digital spaces can somehow be separated from our physical experiences is just an absolute fallacy. When we see intimate partner violence relationships that involve technology, there's no separating, stalking that's happening on a phone versus the abuse that they're experiencing in the home. They interact very closely. And even when someone isn't seeing the person who's harming them physically, perhaps with these anonymous actors, we still experience those harms in our lives. And the research that we've seen from the report that will be out in the spring from CG, shows that women, even in types of tech-facilitated violence where they might experience the same number of incidents as men, so men often get threatened online a lot, and women also do. But when you look at the impact on women, you see a disproportionate amount of women who are actually much more fearful about their physical safety than you do see for men. And so you can see these real gender differences that change how women behave in their physical world, because what's happening to them online is impacting their ability to feel safe in their home if they've been doxxed, their ability to feel safe in their workplace, if people are aware of where they work. And so you see these significant disproportionate harms. Our research also showed that members of the LGBTQ community are experiencing much higher levels of incidence of harms, and also much higher incidences of effects. And we see that particularly in areas of their desire to live, which is extremely disturbing to think of, because we already know within the LGBTQ community, rates of suicide are much higher. But when it comes to tech-facilitated violence, when we see whose desire to live is most impacted, our research was showing that the LGBTQ community is experiencing the most harms. And across North America, we've been seeing these online movements against queer people coming into the real world. When we have people bringing guns to drag story times in North America, we can see the ways that this online harms are really coming into our physical worlds as well. But I think that the things that are most important that we need to be moving forward on are changing social norms through education, shifting our laws so that we have laws that are appropriate, and also making sure that our legal community is really well informed, not just about how to collect digital evidence and manage these types of cases, because we hear anecdotally that a lot of people are turned away, but also to be educated on things like gender-based violence, because what we've seen is that there's a lack of reporting even when laws are in place. And we're seeing the same pattern that we saw with sexual violence. We're seeing the same pattern that we saw with domestic violence, with sexual harassment in the workplace, where women again are having to fight to get these types of harms recognized, And then within our legal system, there's a real challenge on having those harms be validated and properly understood. And this is true across legal systems, educational systems, and social media companies. So I think we have a long way to go. But I've been feeling very hopeful over the last few years. There's so much more research that's being collected. And when we have this data, when we have these stories that people are telling, I think it brings a lot of power to influence change in the field of tech facilitated violence. So I'm coming to this space with the understanding of what a tragic issue this is, but also with the hope for the future.
Thank you. I mean, there's so many great points there. I think this is the first time I've heard a law professor actually address the fact that there doesn't need to be partial or any nudity for something to count as image-based abuse. It was one of my biggest criticisms of the image-based abuse laws in the United States, because they don't recognize that, which means it's really hard for many people. So instead of focusing on the harm experienced by survivors, it's looking at the type of image that is used, which I think really misses the point. But I understand there are legal reasons why it was the way it is, but I think it's a really, really important issue. And also a lot of these laws that are now being, first, came through the United States. Now the EU is looking at it as well. And we raised similar points there. And many other countries are kind of looking at these drafts that were based off Western countries to implement in the majority world, global South. So it's very important to also think about like how these laws actually become like drafts for other places. And you also mentioned how we cannot just think about it in terms of legal remedies, but also like looking at healing, other forms of support, which is really, really important. And thinking about how can we have a holistic environment for supporting survivors. So really great points. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. And I'd like to invite Nina Jankowicz now. Nina, you have a very interesting story. And for those of you who don't know Nina, just before this, I was trying to, tweet out that this panel is happening, and I was mentioning Nina, and just trying to find Nina on Twitter. It took me 10 minutes because of the amount of absolute abuse that she experiences and gets for the work that she does. And I think it's definitely, I really want to hold space for that, and the fact that you're continuing to do this kind of work with you and Laura is just really, really amazing to have you here. So yeah, floor is yours.
Thank you. And thanks to Grace Farms and UNFPA for convening us all today. I think I'm a little less hopeful than some others who have spoken today, just because of what I've been going through. But if there is something that keeps me going, it's that, at least if I've had to deal with this and others are having to deal with it, I should use my experiences to inform, to educate, and to make change, very similar to what the Honorable Tino Jutton was saying earlier. So let me give you a little bit of background about myself. I came to this space because I'm a disinformation researcher. My area of expertise is Russia. And so about 6 years ago, I was working in Ukraine with a lot of women who were kind of on the front lines of Russia's disinformation war. I started working on a book about Russian disinformation. And when I was interviewing women in places like the Republic of Georgia, in Ukraine, in Poland, I kept encountering stories of women who had been targeted with something that we weren't talking about. Hera has mentioned it this morning, gendered disinformation. But at the time, despite it being 2016, 2017, after the US election in which Hillary Clinton was targeted with so much gendered hate and gendered lies, we hadn't really discussed this as a tactic that malign foreign actors used, or indeed that domestic actors used in their disinformation campaigns. And so I began to write about it. I wrote about the story of Svetlana Zalishchuk, who was an MP in Ukraine after the Maidan Revolution. She was targeted by Russia, who said that she had claimed she was going to run down the main street of Kiev naked if Ukraine lost a key battle back in 2014. And as a result, there's a ton of image-based abuse about her, posted all over the internet. Her face superimposed on naked women's bodies, labia imposed on her lips that were just spread all over the place, so much so that when she gave a speech in New York at a UN Women event, a European reporter came up to her and said, "Are these allegations true?" I mean, it's staggering to think about. And so I started telling these women's stories and through the lens of Russia. And talking about gendered disinformation. But it became clear to me as we approached the 2020 election in the United States, and we had the history-making candidacy of Kamala Harris as the first female, first Black, first South Asian woman in the vice presidency, that this was a much broader problem, and it was one that we shouldn't otherize, that it was here at home as well. And so I did some research with the Wilson Center about how this was used in American politics. And we looked at 10 women candidates in the United States for political office in 2020, as well as 3 women who were candidates in other English-speaking countries around the same time. And we found over 6 social media platforms, and that was excluding Facebook because it's really difficult to get data from Facebook, as many of you know. We found over 336,000 pieces of gendered abuse and disinformation, 78% of which was targeted at Kamala Harris, most of which was sexualized, transphobic, or racialized abuse. It was quite staggering. We said, this is not only a democratic issue, as we've heard already from Laura Bates, people are silencing themselves. This is a national security issue, right? We know that our adversaries are using gendered disinformation in order to undermine our democratic processes. Little did I know all of this research would come very much to the forefront of my own life. I was tapped to run a board within the Biden administration called the Disinformation Governance Board earlier this year. I entered government service on March 2nd and left on May 18th because this board was characterized by the GOP as a censorship board. It had nothing to do with censorship. It was about coordinating the response to disinformation within the Department of Homeland Security. And I was attacked because of the vacuum of information about the board, the lack of communication from the administration about it. I was attacked as the young, female, easy to dunk on face of this effort. I was called Big Sister. I was on the front page of the New York Post, and that's the tamest stuff that happened to me. I got rape threats. There was one man who sent me the word cunt every day for 3 weeks. I was 9 months pregnant at the time. And people were wondering, they still wonder to this day, how my husband impregnated me because my eggs are all dried up, apparently, according to them. Other people said I was transgender. One man said, hey, slut, quit your job or everything you've ever loved will be taken from you. And I'm not saying this to kind of, it's just shocking, right? To hear it over and over and over again, as Imran was saying, at scale. You cannot escape it, especially when your work is online. And to the people who say, just turn off the internet, right? Just block those people. I would like the right to express myself online, right? And I would like that for my children. I would like that for all of your children. I would like to have the same rights as the men I'm sitting next to at work every day. And so I quit, right? And I'll get into that a little bit. But it really does come back to the virtual is real. It's not just about these scary words online. Just recently, to give you an idea of the effect that this has had on my life, in addition to tens of thousands of dollars of kind of safety investments that my husband and I have had to make, we had no help from the government in doing any of that. During, again, this vulnerable moment, being extremely pregnant, literally waddling around about to go to the hospital, and then in the early days of my son's life. Since then, I've been at the airport for a document check and they call you over the loudspeaker, Nina Jankowicz, can you please come up to the desk? It's pretty scary when that happens because my face has been on Fox News every week since all of this has happened. Just last week, I was notified that the new Congress is going to be investigating me for what, I don't know, for nothing that I've done wrong. And for 2 hours, the representative who released that letter had my home address on his Twitter and on his website. We had already been doxxed, so this was nothing new, but it was a frantic 2 hours in which, we had to work with essentially these people who had been perpetuating harassment and abuse against me and my family to get that taken down. I've been told by Washingtonians, people who have been in government, older white men for months, welcome to Washington. And again, this is not Washington, this is not politics, this is not acceptable that someone should be attacked the way I was simply for taking a job in her area of expertise. Someone last week told me, well, you're still here. Is my lack of killing myself or someone else killing me the floor at which we're operating here? And moreover, I'm told a lot of the time, and I think people mean this as a compliment. You're so strong. You're so resilient. I wouldn't be able to go through it. And yeah, I wish I didn't have to be strong. I wish I didn't have to be so resilient. And I don't want to do it anymore. I'm exhausted. I just want to be able to do my work. And so what I'm doing now, bringing it back to my work, is I'm the vice president at the Center for Information Resilience, which is a UK-based nonprofit. And one of our main thrusts is combating online harms against women and minorities. And we do this through open source research by connecting what's happening online with what is happening in real life, IRL. Some of the research that we've just done in places like Afghanistan and Myanmar shows that incidents of online violence, including doxing, have led to real threats against women in these areas. In Myanmar, when women are doxed, very frequently the government will show up and arrest them after that because their location has been publicized for the world to see. And so that's work that we're going to be doing through a project we're calling the Hypatia Project. For those of you that don't know Hypatia's story, she was a scholar in ancient Alexandria who was violently murdered by a mob of men for being a leader and a thinker before her time. So I hope that, we can eliminate that threat for women going forward, that the agora that Hypatia taught in online today is one that is safe and equitable for everyone. But I have to say, given the use of these techniques by people in power, not just the president, not just Mike Pence, but by very members of Congress who continue to attack me and continue to attack other women, again, who are just doing their jobs, the media who are playing into all of that, and frankly, the administration in power that failed to protect me, the woman they hired to lead that effort. I'm not pessimistic. I am not optimistic. I am pessimistic. I think we all need to hold those institutions to account. And so that's why I'm so glad to be here today. And I hope I can be a little bit less on a rampage the next time that we all meet. Thank you.
I think there's always time for feminist rampage. We have been quiet for too long. And, there are moments where we call people in and there are moments that we call people out. And because of what you've experienced, it makes complete sense for you to say what you did. And I think that in acknowledging that there is hope, we also need to acknowledge where there isn't hope or where it feels like there isn't hope right now. And what can we do to change that? And something that Imran mentioned and then you also touched on was around how we design spaces or how platforms are designed and how can design be used as a tool, has been used as a tool to kind of encourage or organically has encouraged abuse and violence, but also how we can use the same tool the other way around, which is where I work. And in your case, you also talked about that in a physical setting, which is, politics. When we create schools, workplaces, we think about the culture we set. Someone telling you, welcome to Washington, is saying, this is the house that we've created. And this is the way you have to these are the rules, but rules are created. And so they can be broken and molded. So I think that's really important to think about, what are the cultural norms we've set for spaces online or offline everywhere. As we know, virtual is real, offline and offline, just the same thing. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I would love to invite Ileana Silva from Derechos Digitales.
I will need the...
Yes, we will have a presentation. So,
Sorry. Well, hi, thank you for inviting me here. My name is Ileana, and I'm here in behalf of Derechos Digitales. As you can see in the presentation, that is in Spanish. It says 17 years defending your rights on the digital environment. I work there as a communications officer. Before I start, I want to give special thanks to Alex and Steph for all the support and for having me here also. I realized that I am here with two important challenges. The first one, speaking English. No. So please sorry for my English. If you need some explanation, don't hesitate to ask. No, my first challenge is to talking about what are we doing at Derechos Digitales, and also to take a Latin American vision here. Well, online gender violence is in a context of structural violence in Latin America. This kind of virtual is real, yes. Virtual is real, and offline and online violence are a big problem, and something that has taken the women, especially colored women and LGBTQ plus people out from public spaces and virtual spaces too. In that sense, many feminists have also been questioning the infrastructures that support the technologies that we use. But there are also much more technical dimensions around bringing the idea of the passive users of technologies. We have always the stigma like, okay, women, they don't study technology, engineering at all, but it's important to know how to habitate that space. Derechos Digitales have tried to contribute of this process of reflection, questioning, working, and trying to occupy an important place for our organization in relation to influencing and for the design of public policies and individual practices as well. Also to make a reflection inside our organization about how we work. Well, in the COVID pandemic, we realized that we wanted to contribute with the discussion, making a regional consulting with feminist organizations and defenders all around Latin America. We had information from Brazil, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Guatemala, and Mexico. And we identified that the NGOs were doing the hard work with this kind of violence, that the responses of the governments was, again, small and slow. We think that always we were going the technology and the law some steps behind. In recent years, it is unfair to say that we don't have laws in Latin America for online violence, because we have it. In recent years, it has been identified. They start to create some spaces for cyberbullying, for cyber harassment. For example, Mexico have a division, Argentina too, Colombia, Brazil. As an organization, we recognize that criminalizing violence online is not enough, but it's a good first step. And that has to be accompanied by public policies and other measures as well. We know that we have important legislative challenges, but it's a very good point of start. All start with feminists, with nonprofits, with international organizations. It's important to say that we're facing new actors too, when we are talking about online violence. So for the mechanism, as you said, we can't say women, okay, stay away from social networks, because sometimes social network is the way to have access to information, to have communication. So sometimes it goes from the government, but also from the networks, from the companies. So it's not always from the states. We have identified some, for example, some states that have included the online violence into their surveys, for example, because each violence against women in the online world should have an impact on public policies. Each criminal pattern should have a response to prevent, but also we have to repair. So the law is very important, it's fundamental, but criminalizing, again, is not enough. I will show you some initiatives that we do with Derechos Digitales. This is a microsite called Micro SD Cards. You can find it in English and in Spanish. It's part of project that looks for online security for women journalists and social communicators. There are some kind of things that you can, it's like a play. I love this project. It's like a play, and you can know that. The second one that I would like, we have more initiatives, but I like to share that. It's a submission that we developed in the COVID pandemic because of the violence against women in Latin America with a perspective of digital rights. The submission was presented. Like the idea is to make the difference between offline and online violence, to speak again how virtual is real, and make a map of the region. This is available on our website too. And this is okay, how to build, how to work in a positive way, I think. How can we develop AI with a feminist perspective is really important, because it is possible to build without logics of oppression. And we are working in that. We are making networks. And for finishing my presentation, this is in a demonstration of the 8th of March. It says, somos más fuertes que un Nokia 1100. We are stronger than a Nokia. Is the hardest phone. I think that I like it because we are talking about technology, and we think that the key, the solution is building networks, working with the NGO, working with the feminists, working with the government, working with global organizations, because we have to protect women online, and we also have to protect the protectors. It is important to protect the protectors from the censorship, from the surveillance in America Latina is really hard. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a very clear call. Yeah. Very clear call to solidarity across different groups. I think that's a really excellent message.
Thank you.
I'd love to invite Luna, who is joining us from Plan International and is part of the USA Youth Board. Luna, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. It is truly an honor to be here. I appreciate my fellow panelists for the stories you've shared so far. As I said, my name is Luna. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a member of Plan International USA's Youth Advisory Board. I'm also a student at Duke University. So I want to head right into a personal story that speaks to two aspects of technology facilitated gender-based violence that I think we truly need more policy focusing on. The first is its relentless nature, and the second is the capacity for long-term harm facilitated by gender-based violence. So I want to take you back to when I was 14. I was in middle school, and I got Instagram for the first time. And I was walking to the bus, and a male student at my middle school approached, and he was like, "Do you have social media? Do you have Instagram?" I was surprised by his attention. And so I decided to download the platform to communicate with him. Well, spoiler, I ended up receiving Instagram DMs from this guy on and off for over 2 years. That's a long time for a teenager. And within that time, our relationship quickly went from, some sort of mutual friendship to what was clearly one-sided harassment. I realized I did not want to have a relationship with this man, and I told him so myself. But despite this, he would message me 1 to 4 times a day. He would ask persistently how I was, asked if I liked him, even if I wanted to have sex with him. He stalked me, he gave me gifts, and he pressured me over the safety of a messaging function. What's really unfortunate and embarrassing about this is that I couldn't even bring myself to block him. I unfollowed him, but the next step of blocking felt too desperate. We saw each other in the halls every day. We'd pass by. But soon my harasser began to tell me about his mental instability. He told me that my lack of interest in him was making him want to kill himself. And obviously that made me feel guilty and worried about what he would say next and the serious implications of what his online messaging could have in my in-person school life. Because of that sense of worry is what kept me locked into reading all of his messages. And I want to take you to this specific moment where I really felt the horrible nature of this harassment, which is, going to bed at night. I would be in my dark room and my phone would light up on my bedside table next to where I was falling asleep. And, in all of those moments, his harassment was permeating my safest of places. Our online harassment permeates our safest of places. I was only 14. And so the social media platforms, they allow gender-based violence to be persistent and relentless. In experiences like mine, technology facilitates this message that to perpetrators that a no is never final or absolute. I feel that my harasser was thinking, like, how can I circumvent her no? I work with Plan International, and our research has found that through over 40,000 interviews, a full 58% of young women interviewed by Plan reported experiencing online harassment and abuse. 58%, that's really astounding. The plethora of apps that we have available today, I think that makes it even worse. You have this compounding cacophony of harassment from multiple platforms at once. And unfortunately, it's uncomfortable and difficult for people like me to reach out for help when these issues are so normalized and impacting so many of us as youth. Amongst all of this, I have chosen to maintain a public social media platform. I do this because it's important for me to speak on climate change and gender equality. I am an activist, and so social media is a tool for me to share my voice, and it's a tool for all of us to engage in collective and systemic action. But gender-based violence, it threatens to silence our voices. And so I see the ultimate goal within all of us and within Plan International's advocacy to secure an environment where anyone, especially girls and marginalized groups, can make informed decisions about their engagement with technology. I want to share with you all several policy recommendations that I've been thinking about given my experience. First, we need a reframing of what gender violence means. I've seen that policies often use gender to be synonymous with women, and it's important we include gender diverse and non-binary youth just as strongly in policymaking. Second, we need policies that address long-term harassment, like the kind I faced for 2 years. I wish tech platforms had better capacities for muting messages and posts and feeds, and also for allowing users to exit online platforms without scrutiny. We need available information pages, like pages that can assist at-risk users with crisis resolution. I support the trauma-informed and victim-centered practices of the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act passed in the US this year. And one suggestion I have on this point is I would love for us to explore some sort of pop-up page or dedicated space where when people first download public social media apps and tech apps, that page can remind users of their online rights, ramifications of engaging in abusive behavior, and even ways to report harm. We also need safeguarding for geolocation data use. Just yesterday, my friend, she was having a panic attack because of her online abuser, and she stopped sharing her location with him over messages. I looked over her phone, and we were both appalled to realize that the messaging app sends a notification over text, informing the perpetrator that she had disabled location sharing. And I mean, that's an exposition of privacy in a moment of self-defense, and that puts her at risk of backlash and future harassment. So that's something that needs to be changed. Third, in the wake of recent events with Twitter, I'm sure we have all seen the need for a president for tech platforms to provide greater accountability and dedication to human rights, even during internal changes. I do not believe it's acceptable for us to cut essential content moderation. And to be honest, I don't think platforms would follow that course of action if they face some sort of liability. Lastly, it is so important we continue to have youth speaking on these topics. I'm honored you gave me this opportunity today, and I would love to see similar spaces provided to us in policy implementation practices, for example. Please consider targeted stakeholder engagement, bringing us into retrospective regulatory review processes. You could even establish a task force for gender diverse youth to comment on the impacts of policy. That is many different policy recommendations I have, but overall, I hope my experiences online and the experiences of girls globally can inform your next steps. Plan International and especially our Youth Advisory Board are looking forward to future collaboration with the global partnership. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Luna, both for sharing your story, but also like having a really clear call to action for everybody here, but not treating young people as just, a focus group that we go to ask their opinions, but actually share power with them and involve them in all forms of advocacy, research, policy making, very important. And also the great point about gender diversity. When we talk about women, we also need to talk about other marginalized genders. And we've talked about intersectionality quite a lot on this panel. So I'm just really happy that Luna brought it up again. So thank you so much for that, Luna. And now we have time to ask, to get your questions answered. And I'd love to invite the audience here in person, but also the one that's online. We have a friend here who's going to tell us the online questions, and we have roaming mics to go around and answer any of the questions that you may have. So we have about 15 minutes for this. So, and I'm really curious to hear what you have. If not, I have 25 questions that I can ask. So.
Hi, thanks for such a great panel so far. We have an online question that's pretty pertinent. Just read it off, but it's from a fellow faculty member of gender studies. So there is a professor here, so it seemed like a natural progression. They are wondering about the role of academia in fighting technology facilitated GBV, and they do note that raising awareness has proven somewhat insufficient for them to respond to the online hate and abuse. And they're also wondering how to engage their students without exposing them to abuse, and how they might work with or facilitate work with other NGOs such as Grace Farms and other ones involved in the space.
Great questions. I'll invite Susie, and then I think Nina is a researcher as well, and it'd be great to hear your comments as well. And I also have something to say about this. But first, you, Susie.
Yeah, I think obviously educational institutions have a really important role to play, and I think that this is true in post-secondary as well as secondary and elementary schools. I think a lot of online gender-based violence has a sexual element to it, so I think there's a really natural space to include tech issues in sex education with young people in elementary schools and secondary schools as it's appropriate. And as well as universities. In Canada, we've passed some laws recently where universities are required to have some education around sexual violence in their institutions. And I think that education piece is important, and having it be required that students have to take it. But ultimately, I do think that we need to work within our own institutions. So I know the BC, British Columbia province in Canada, their universities right now are looking at what their policies and practices are around addressing online gender-based violence, because in the same way that we see these barriers with people who are reporting to police, we see barriers when people are reporting to campus authorities when these types of harms are occurring. And just like we saw in elementary schools, where initially when bullying was happening outside of the school, if it was happening on Facebook or Instagram, a lot of elementary schools and secondary schools were saying, this isn't really our responsibility because it's, again, not happening in this physical space. You were seeing that like physical online, offline divide happening. And I think that that has to be resisted in university campuses as well. If there's online sexual harassment happening, or threats against feminists and these types of things, that the university institution needs to have proper procedures in place on how to address that, because it does impact the larger community. And then as academics, like I know for myself, like I teach in this area, so it's really easy for me to incorporate this content into classes. But I think there's all sorts of opportunities for people who are teaching in different areas of social science and computer science. I think in particular, that's one thing that we've really been pushing for at Dalhousie. We're actually hiring someone right now who's going to be a cross-posting between law and computer science, because what we're seeing is a lot of people who are developing the technologies that facilitate these harms haven't always done a kind of safety by design within the process of creating these types of technologies. And I think having the types of technical tools that Luna was talking about, where people can choose whether to mute or to block or to shape their experiences online, is something that should be done in the beginning. And so having an ethics requirement in computer science, I think, is something that's incredibly important, so that we're having those processes thought about at the beginning of someone's academic education when they're going to be creating these technologies, rather than doing a lot of the work that we're doing now, which is a lot of band-aiding, where we're creating laws, where we're looking for universities to have responses. But ultimately what we want to do is to not have the harms in the first place. And so I think you can incorporate that into various spaces in academia.
I would agree wholeheartedly with everything Susie has said. And I'll just add one other thing, which is, while we need to also protect students, and I'm an adjunct professor at Syracuse University, we need to protect the academics and researchers themselves as well. And I would say that goes for any public facing individual who's working on these issues or any issues online, who is the face of your organization online. There are far too few organizations that have explicit policies about what happens when somebody is undergoing online abuse, whether it's gender-based or otherwise. And so I'd encourage all the comms officers out there to bring this up with your HR policies, to bring up with your departments at universities. What are you going to do when I, a woman researcher, am out there on TV, on the radio, talking about my research at conferences and events, and I'm facing threats to my safety? Newsrooms think about this a lot, or are starting to think about it more. They think about, when we're going to move people out of their house, or if we're going to invest in software like Delete Me, middleware like Delete Me, that's going to scrub somebody's online history so that they can't be as easily doxxed. But academic institutions, international organizations need to think about that as well, and need to think about that proactively, I would say.
Great points. And just the other thing I'd like to add is something Ileana said is about how important collaboration is. I found whenever the voices of academics carries a lot of weight, especially in policy discussions. And, whenever we've collaborated with any academic institution, even though we have ground experience, somehow it is the academic experience that always counts more. So actually, academics have power, and I think they should understand and use it. So work more with nonprofits and actually if we have targeted approaches on tackling and providing the evidence, that often people are like, where's the evidence? And, unless it's not documented in a particular way in academic speak, often it doesn't count. So I think that is a really great use of that power. Do we have any other questions from in this room? Yeah.
Yeah, we have one more online. Speaking about or has a question about humanitarianism. It's somebody who works in GBV research and especially tech facilitated GBV in humanitarian contexts. And so if we can answer that, that would be great. And they were just wondering how you think TFGBV contributes to specific risks in humanitarian or emergency settings, or vice versa, how those settings may contribute to TFGBV.
So I'll throw something quickly in, and this is not my area of expertise. However, we saw this very blatantly as the Ukraine conflict flared up this year. And I shouldn't call it a conflict. It is a war. It is a full-out war. It has been a full-out war for over 8 years. As the secondary invasion of Ukraine began, as there was this mass exodus of refugees, mostly women and children, flowing into the European Union, we saw a lot of human trafficking blossoming from that. And a lot of it was through online disinformation, people being told, come with this person, they'll get you across the border, they'll get you to a European country, you'll get your asylum status or refugee status, when indeed they were actually human traffickers. So I think in those conflict situations and in areas of extreme humanitarian need, we need to think proactively as the international community about how to mitigate and really shine light on those really nefarious actions, and ideally proactively communicate to the populations that are affected that this is something that you should watch out for. And here are some other resources to go through, rather than taking the first person who can get you across the border safely. It's become a reality of that sort of conflict environment. Unfortunately, we saw a lot of it with the refugee crisis back in 2014.
Exactly. I was going to say that we work a lot with refugees and migrants, and I think the human trafficking threat is real, but also just any other form of gender-based violence that happens anyway is exasperated in conflict situations, because, perpetrators are humans as well. And when there's increased, reasons for desperation and anger, that cruelty has to come out somewhere. And also survivors are a lot more vulnerable because they're often, really reliant on, they don't have enough data. There's a lot of, it's very difficult to find reliable sources of information. Most of my work is around healing and access to information so that survivors can make informed choices. Multi-language content is really hard to find. So we work in 14 languages, and we found a huge spike, especially around legal information and information around healing from trauma. So there's, the humanitarian setting is no different than any other, apart from the fact that people are in the worst situation, and time is something that, and they don't have control over their surroundings and how safe they are. So that it just becomes even more important. I'm going to ask the last question. And I'm going to start with Luna. So I'll ask this for everybody. And one of the things that we've touched upon is how we can sort of, when we think about the different ways of looking at, tech abuse, we talked about platform responsibility. And I want to touch on that, because we've talked about what government can do, what laws can do, but really what is it that we think platforms can do, either the ones that exist right now, but also the ones that may exist in the future. A few years ago, there was no TikTok. Now TikTok is it, it is the platform. Someone created TikTok. So what are the kind of principles or practices that we can, that creators need to embed in the creation or the moderation, or right now, like we are in that fighting back mode, in the accountability of these platforms that will make them safer, happier spaces so that, women and other marginalized genders can be themselves and not be afraid to fully live online as you would live offline. So Luna, I want to start with you. What is it that you think platforms can do more?
Absolutely, thank you. I believe I spoke to many of these topics in previously, and I think this comes to several different areas. It's giving users the agency and the capacity to intentionally use social media platforms and tech platforms in a way that they can feel safe and be able to speak on topics of activism. My generation has grown up with many tech tools as a fundamental part of our development. And so while we are very aware of these platforms and we have, the sense of like being able to curate our feeds and curating what we post and share, we do need help from the tech side of things to ensure that we're engaging in platforms safely. One thing that I would love to kind of add on to what I was saying before is that we do have to be careful about the balance we take in focusing on victims versus focusing on perpetrators, and understanding that sometimes these security services, such as blocking people and reporting people, can put victims in a place of insecurity, and that if their abusers find out and they're reporting them, they can, engage in future harm. And I think that is one thing that decentralizes people that are being harmed from engaging in these services because they fear their abusers will find out. And so I think having those different levels of security would be really beneficial for these conversations. And touching on the human rights connection of before, which I believe also relates to this question, I think we're speaking from a global level, but we have to be careful that
your voice is really cutting off for us. So I'll just ask you to wrap up and just like one last point, because we're losing your sound.
I'm so sorry about that. Just that we have to be careful that we play an important balance between security and ensuring gender equality, that we aren't engaging in surveillance governing gender. Thank you.
Really important point. Thank you. And just for everybody, we have about 4 minutes, so just like 1 point each, please. What would you like to see?
Human rights based content moderation. I think that
all in for that.
Yes, this is my point. There are content moderation now, but we know that it's not enough, and it is another responsibility. It's not. We have to understand that there are some responsibilities that are from the companies.
Yeah, and they're not always. Yeah, there's a real problem with equity when it comes to languages and regions. Susie.
Yeah, I think just consistency is one of the greatest challenges around having rules that are clear, that people can understand. They understand how they're being implemented, why they're being implemented. And right now, I think that those social media companies have been putting more and more effort into improving their policies. You see the shift of something like what's happened with Twitter, and it does suggest that there might be a need for actual regulation, that companies might need to be required by governments to actually ensure that their platforms have a base level of safety to them.
Great. Transparency, consistency, and perhaps regulation.
Accountability. I can't tell you how many thousands of reports I have sent that are explicitly violations of terms of service that have not been acted upon by the platforms. And then beyond that, making sure, and you spoke about this a little bit, Susie, making sure that the folks who are making the policies, making the technology are diverse and representative of the user base, having the subject matter expertise from different countries, different linguistic environments, different genders, different cultures. So important, doesn't exist, especially when tech companies are firing lots and lots of people right now.
I mean, we are so far from any of those points, from transparency, consistency of enforcement, of accountability, or responsibility. We'd be gaslighting ourselves if we pretended that we're getting closer to it every day. We're getting further away from it. The Musk takeover of Twitter tells you that. I mean, just 3 quick evidence points of this. We did a study called Hidden Hate, which looked at Instagram DMs. We took Amber Heard and 5 other women, prominent women's Instagram DMs. We downloaded all of them with their, obviously with their consent. And we then looked at how much of it was hate, 1 in 7. And really, really nasty stuff as well. We then reported it to the platform, to Instagram, using their accounts. 9 out of 10 times, they did nothing. To someone sending a video saying, masturbating over a picture of them or saying that they're going to rape and kill them. 9 out of 10 times, the world's biggest internet company, Meta, did nothing, even when it's Amber Heard. What do you think they're going to do when it's a gender campaigner in Mauritius or Pakistan or Afghanistan? Nothing. Second piece of evidence, we released a report called The Incelosphere, showing that 17,000 men are part of a community which we identified and studied, downloading 1.3 million posts, finding that 87% of them agree that rape is acceptable of women. We found the YouTube channels that they were subscribing to that were part of that community. We reported them to YouTube. One of them is called Incels TV. It's an indoctrination channel. One of them is called Slut Hate Creeps. It's a guy going around the London Underground, videoing women without their permission and interracial couples who he hates. I sent it to YouTube's top executive in Europe. He said it didn't break their rules, and it's still up now. You can go right now and find Slut Hate Creeps and the videos there, and Incels TV. They did nothing about it. The third is TikTok. We set up new accounts as a young guy on TikTok. Within 2.5 minutes, it was recommending algorithmically Andrew Tate's videos, who was one of the most vile misogynists on the planet today. And they then took enforcement action and removed his channel. He's back on there. So right now, if you go on TikTok, 1.5 months after that big Shanti Das Observer article that kicked off the whole Andrew Tate thing, he's back. They are not doing their jobs. We need to have legislation as a backstop against the impunity with which these mega corporations operate. Mark Zuckerberg will not change a business model that has made him $100 billion, because that's a great business model. It's a really bad model for civil rights, for human existence, for human progress. And I would urge you to think, let's be realistic about these things. You can talk about policy changes you want on the platforms, but we need our legislators to have our backs.
So we need to change market dynamics, we need to change market incentives, and we need legislators to have our backs. I hope legislators are listening to us. The message is loud and clear from the panel. Thank you so much for sharing all the work that you do and for our great audience, both online and in person.
Thank you.
Thank you again. At this time, we are going to switch over and play 2 pre-recorded statements. And I know we've been going for a long time. We have so many wonderful and extraordinary speakers that we didn't allot for time for a formal break. But this is a good time if you need a comfort break. The restrooms are right outside the main entrance there. There's still some beverages in the back. And while we set up the pre-recorded statements, we have a pre-recorded statement from the Honorable Harjit Sajjan. He is the Minister of International Development in Canada, and he's responsible for the Pacific Economic Development Agency of Canada in that role. He first joined and became a member of Parliament for Vancouver South in 2015, and he also served as the Minister of National Defense from 2015 to 2021. So we have a pre-recorded statement from him, and that will be followed with a pre-recorded statement from Julie Inman Grant. She is the Australian E-Safety Commissioner. Julie in this role, leads the world's first government regulatory agency committed to keeping its citizens safer online. She has extensive experience in the nonprofit and government sectors and spent 2 decades working in senior public policy and safety roles in the tech industry at Microsoft, Twitter, and Adobe. So I will have our production folks queue up those 2 pre-recorded statements, and we'll play those, and then we'll follow it with a panel. Thank you.
Let me begin by acknowledging that I'm here speaking to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. The toxic combination of misogyny, bigotry, and technology has made the internet less free, less safe, and less equitable for women, girls, and gender diverse individuals. It is imperative that we take collective action. That is why this meeting comes at a crucial time as we face the challenge of technology in an evolving global landscape. These technologies are often used to harass, control, attack, and silence individuals in online spaces. Now, according to a recent survey of 18 countries conducted by a Canadian think tank, the problems related to this practice are far-reaching and potentially devastating, especially among women and gender diverse individuals. 6 out of 10 reported online harassment and coercion. 6 out of 10 reported harm to identity and reputation. And 6 out of 10 reported harm to privacy and security in their use of technology. And this is unacceptable. We must do more to prevent and address online harassment and violence, especially gender-based violence. We must work to develop laws, policies, tools, and institutions that ensure all people are supported and protected. And we must make sure their rights are upheld. This is true whether the space is physical or digital. Canada supports and appreciates the work of the UNFPA. It is a leader in providing technical expertise and public awareness of technology-facilitated gender-based violence. This includes the Body Right Campaign and the first ever global symposium dedicated to this phenomenon. So congratulations. As a main contributor to UNFPA's work on gender-based violence, we know that it is important not only to respond to it, but also to prevent it. We all support UNFPA's intersectional and human rights-based approach to ensure that no one is left behind. Standing alongside UNFPA, Canada has an important role to play in ending technology-facilitated gender-based violence. That is why we joined the Global Partnership for Action on Gender-Based Online Harassment and Abuse. This is a key new vehicle for driving forward this issue. It brings together key global stakeholders to focus attention on those most vulnerable to the downsides of technology in the digital age. As 2022 chair of the Freedom Online Coalition, Canada is also proud to foster a world in which everyone can participate safely and meaningfully online. But it is essential to better understand the challenges we face in addressing this devastating issue. That is why I'm happy to share today that Canada is extending its research to the think tank I previously mentioned, the Center for International Governance Innovation, for an additional 15 plus countries. This funding of $1.5 million will allow Canada's International Development Research Center to develop further into women's and LGBTQI+ communities online experiences across the global south. From the women's human rights defenders in Iran to the online safety of my own children. This is a priority for all of us, and there is hope. New information and communications technologies offer opportunities to empower women and girls. These technologies must be made available to all and must advance gender equality, and they must promote and protect human rights. Together, by preventing and responding to technology-facilitated gender-based violence, we can start to imagine a world where digital progress benefits everyone. I wish you well with the rest of your program today and in the days ahead. You have an ally in me and in Canada. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Hello, everyone. It's really good to be with you, even if virtually. As Australia's e-safety commissioner, I lead the world's first government regulatory agency dedicated to protecting people from a range of digital harms. Like many of you, we see the terrible impact of gender-based online violence every single day. Not only the impact on women and older teens, but also the profound impact on young girls too. And the stories we hear from digital first responders and health professionals and those on the front lines of domestic and family violence are absolutely devastating. Technology facilitated abuse, or TFA, as an extension of the monitoring, stalking, gaslighting, harassment, and coercion of women and children is almost ubiquitous in DV situations. We want to prevent online harms from happening to women and girls in the first place. And that's precisely why we've established an expansive research and evidence base that informs our resources and programs. Our eSafety Women program works at the pointy end of online abuse for women and children experiencing technology-facilitated abuse, or TFA, as an extension of family violence. But we also know that 1 in 3 Australian women experience online abuse in the course of their work. And this shouldn't be a cost of doing business. This silences their voices and inhibits them from taking professional roles that require them to be online. Targeted misogynistic abuse that manifests in sexualized, personal, and violent comments about a woman's appearance, outdated gender roles, even abuse about their fertility. None of this should be the cost of women doing business. So we've developed resources to give women social media self-defense tools. This helps them to build their psychological armor so that they can continue lifting their voices online through our Women in the Spotlight training program. Under Australia's Online Safety Act, eSafety operates several world-first schemes to protect all Australians from online harm. Our youth-based cyberbullying scheme has helped thousands of children get seriously harassing, threatening, intimidating, or humiliating content taken down after technology platforms failed to act or missed context. We know that 1 in 5 Australian children experience online bullying. Girls are bullied more than boys, and while the average age is 14, it continues to get younger. We've had reports from 8 and 9-year-olds following more extensive and permissive use of technology over the pandemic. A new adult cyber abuse scheme that provides fining and removal powers for targeted online abuse intended to cause serious harm is also in place and covers doxing and cyber stalking. Our image-based abuse scheme that helps people who've had their intimate images and videos shared online without consent has about a 90% success rate in getting these intimate images and videos taken down. And we know this contributes to immediate harms alleviation. And we also target illegal and restricted content, such as child sexual exploitation material, which again disproportionately features girls experiencing the most horrendous abuse imaginable. It is through these regulatory schemes that we support people caught in the grip of personal online crisis. And we prevent the re-traumatization of victim survivors through the further online distribution of this violative material. In Australia, we have some of the strongest online safety protections in the world, so we can act for any Australian who feels they have nowhere else to turn. We serve as a safety net. But most countries do not have any digital safeguards in place. So we need more action from governments to regulate those permissive hosting environments that allow online abuse to flourish. We want to work with other governments to help achieve these same levels of success for their citizens, for all the world's citizens. And we want tech companies to step up to protect, empower, and support women online. And that's why we're asking them to make their products safer by design and by providing them with the tools to do just that. Driving such proactive and systemic change is fundamental to our work at eSafety, work we underpin with local and global partnerships. Like our founding membership of the Global Partnership for Action on Gender-Based Online Harassment and Abuse, and our important technical partnership with UNFPA. Now, we know that one small regulator in Australia cannot fix all these global problems alone, which is why we've just launched the Global Online Safety Regulators Network with Fiji, the UK, and Ireland. and we expect more regulators to join us very soon. We need to support change at the systemic level too, and are doing so through legal transparency notices to the platforms, as well as through mandatory industry codes. The very fact that there are events such as these makes me believe we can tackle gender-based online violence, and we must do so together. I truly believe we can make the online world a safer place for everyone, and I appreciate all of your efforts to help us collectively become the necessary agents of online change. Thank you.
All right, we're going to get started with our next panel. So I'll ask the panelists to come forward, and I'll ask all the audience members if you could retake your seats. Up next, we have a panel discussion on U.S. and international laws and policies, a global coalition and global response. The panel will be moderated by Dr. Aditya Gupta, who is a facilitated gender-based violence advisor at USAID. And we also have joining her on the panel, Nigat Dodd, who's the founder of Digital Rights Foundation, a friend of mine and former colleague, Nancy Gifford, who's the chief of major crimes unit here at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Connecticut. We have Peyton Ihame, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. I apologize if I mispronounced it, who's the Vice President for Public Policy at Bumble. And we also have all the way from Austin, Texas, and we're so grateful that she's here, Katie Ray Jones, who's the CEO of the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and Verena Winder, who's the Senior Advisor at the U.S. Department of State Office of Global Women's Issues. So our next panel is here, and I'll turn it over to Anita.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. My name is Aditi Gupta. I'm a consultant at USAID, and I focus on tech-facilitated gender-based violence issues, and I'm really excited to be moderating this panel with this wonderful group of speakers. So we will be talking about both international and U.S. domestic laws and policies, and we have a variety of speakers here who have worked in both those spaces. So I think it'll be really exciting and captivating discussion. So at the end, again, we'll have some time for questions and answers. So please feel free to think of those questions as you're listening to these people talk about the really amazing work that they do. So we'll get started right away. So first, I would like to turn it over to Nancy Gifford, who is the Chief of Major Crimes Unit at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Connecticut.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. So most of my day, I usually spend sort of dealing with gender-based violence on a micro level. So this is a real treat for me to be able to hear some of the macro issues, the policy. As was mentioned, I'm Chief of Major Crimes, and in our unit, we deal with a variety of crimes, but I've focused my practice primarily on violence against women, child exploitation, child pornography, hate crimes, and civil rights. So on a daily basis, I certainly felt some similarity with the prior panel about pessimism. My day is spent answering calls of some of the worst things that you can see and hear happening to other people. Prior to joining the office, I also worked in the internet safety field. I did that for about 8 years while my children were growing up, and I traveled around the United States teaching internet safety, law enforcement, schools, and parents. So part of what I wanted to talk about today is what I say to parents back when I was doing that work, because it's scary as a parent. It's a scary, for me, I'm a mom of 3. I've got 2 girls who are now in college, but navigating the digital environment was so difficult and consumed so much more of the time of parenting than I ever wished to have. And so what the easiest message I can give to parents is about digital literacy and helping kids understand that their innate sense of right and wrong, that it translates online, and starting that conversation early. And one of the best programs that I have seen is one in which our teachers are using an online website that's dedicated towards like, it appears like it's raising money for an animal that's just been found in the rainforest. And the parents come back, or sorry, a teacher is saying, I'm raising money. Let's all this classroom raise money for this child, this animal that's been found. And it's a lesson taught, say, in 2nd and 3rd grade. They spend about a week drawing pictures of the animal, raising money, and then the following week, the teacher comes in and says, I am so sorry. I was duped. You were duped. We were all duped. This is terrible. There's people online that do these things. I should have known better. And now I'm going to go back and look and see all these things that would have shown me that this was not accurate. And it's a good lesson to start at a very young age, because that translates to things like websites about incels. Maybe you realize that the message that they're sending is not accurate. It can translate in so many different ways if you can start that message young. So that's one of the main things I speak to parents. The other is the platforms. While there are so many things that can be improved with platforms, much of which you've heard about today, it's a bit like playing whack-a-mole. So you pop on one and another one's going to pop up with different things. And so if you can get a baseline of literacy and consciousness of right and wrong developed in your kids at an early age, that's going to be helping regardless of what the platform is. The final message really is one about when something goes wrong in the home. And that was referenced in the earlier panel about kids feeling isolated and alone. When something does go wrong, it can exacerbate, and especially for our young girls. This one is important for parents to talk about. When something goes wrong, what's the consequence going to be at home? If you tell me you posted something, you sent a picture, what's the consequence going to be? And the consequence has to be, we will take care of it together to the extent you can, and not now your phone's going to be taken away. This link to your friends is going to be taken away. You can talk about going forward. We will handle problems together. It will help with these kids coming forward. So that's a conversation I have with my parents in that role. In my role now, what I see on a regular basis is the trauma that these victims have, and the trauma is exacerbated by guilt, feeling that they have a role in some of what happened to them. And I can tell you from in extreme cases where a hidden camera in a bathroom and the victim still says, I should have known that that camera was there. I've had a child ripped out of kidnapped out of a park. I shouldn't have been there by myself. Things for which there's absolutely no chance that they played a role in this. You take that down the road to people who were groomed online and someone has traveled across country to meet them and take them out of their bedroom. The guilt they feel all along the way, whether it was from the moment this conversation started, I wish I could stop it, to now things have exacerbated and I'm in the car with someone I don't know and I'm scared. The guilt is stopping them from reaching out. So one of my proudest moments usually is at sentencing, when we try and have those victims stand up and say to the judge what happened to them. And what we've been trying to work with many of our victims is, please don't take responsibility for this crime. This crime has one adult, usually most of my victims are children. There's one adult in the room who's responsible for this. So for that one example I mentioned about the child in the park, she stood up. And it was a great moment to say, she went from, I should say, from the first day saying, literally, I shouldn't have been in the park. I shouldn't have gotten the car. I should have realized. I should have fought harder, to the day that she stood up at sentencing saying, you messed with the wrong girl. And that's what I want to hear more when we talk about gender-based violence, and is seeing that those who are victimized being able to recognize, one, that they have no role in the victimization, that they should not share any of the guilt of the fact that they are the subject of being targeted, but also that they can be resilient, and that there is a next step for them. So.
Wow, thank you so much. That was, I think, the perfect beginning to this panel because, as we talk about laws, policies, regulations, it can be so easy to forget that they're about people. They impact the survivors and the victims that are survivors of these crimes, right? Like we really, really need to keep that survivor-centered piece. So I really appreciate the amazing beginning to this panel that you've really given us. So I will now pass it over to Peyton Naimi, who is the Vice President of Public Policy at Bumble.
Well, thanks for having me and thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for letting us be a part of the discussion. I like to start off with recognizing that it's not normal for us to be and part of this discussion, and we recognize that more than anyone else. I personally am used to not being the person that you would see in that room. I am a national security expert. I am not a gender specialist. I've spent over 20 years usually in combat in some other place, in special operations or working in some classified settings, whether it's, White House, under the Obama days, Pentagon or the US Army. But what I do remember is the real personal impact of whatever the harm is and how that's played out. And so that's something that transitions to the work we're doing. Some people know a little bit of the backstory, and the reason I share it is it's important. So the company is not that old, founded in 2014 by Whitney Wolfe Herd. She has her own story, which she can tell herself, but it's public. So if you don't know that, you should look into it. But it was the genesis of why the company was started from some bad experiences, gender-based harassment, et cetera, that spurred her to figure out how do I start a company. She worked in the dating space. And so that naturally is what that expanded to. But that's focused on women, where women are the first to lead the interaction and the first people who are saying yes or no to the communication. How does that change the norm for how people are interacting? There's no such animal in a startup as a policy team. And so it's not very common, but that's the space I come out of. And so the goal of starting up the policy team with our global team was how do we put into this action, this idea of kinder interactions on the internet and put it into real policy. That's kind of where I bridge the bridging two worlds is being in the real world and seeing how it impacts victims. But also working in policy with governments and industry, which are completely different players. And so what a lot of the focus is behavior change is one, because we're very consumer facing. So we're in an odd position in the sense of that we are catering to consumer. We're not an advocacy org, right? We're not government with constituents. We literally are a consumer facing base. So we're working with women from 18 and up and also men. But at the same time, if we've decided to put ourselves in this policy advocacy space, right, we're also pushing it that way. So how do you stand up and be fun, empowerment, women? And again, we do dating, it's friendship and business networking. The app covers all three, but at the same time, be you know what, we're going to start passing some laws on flashing or on NCII type issues. How do you be saying that out of both sides of your mouth? And that's the tight rope that we walk, and it's the work that I'm leading. The thing that we bring up is we're mostly known for our work on this cyber flashing, digital flashing, unsolicited lewd pics being sent to people, but it's really not the pure focus of our work. It's anything in this harm space, but also empowerment. The reason why that one is of particular interest to me is because it's illegal in most places. As we heard earlier, there's plenty of laws about some of these things in some countries, but it's the enforcement and how it's played out in real life that's lacking. So when we look at that and we're well, flashing people is illegal in all 50 states. If you're looking at the US context, it's illegal in UK and others. But if you did it online, people are oh, that's a Frankenstein. We don't know what animal is that? It's the same thing. So what makes it different in real life versus online? Harm is similar. Or are you telling, women, and it also happens to men, that, oh, you have to have this immediate danger of it being in your face for it to count. All the rest of it doesn't count. So we started passing laws in our home state of Texas, which people would be surprised about, making it, a punitive action, right? If that's happening. A lot of people are like, oh, it's the law passing that's important. You know, we just passed it in Virginia earlier. We've working with the UK on the OSB. We're working in many global contexts, but it's the conversation that's more important to us. That first time that people know what to call something, and that it's happening to me. The interesting fact that a lot of women, it doesn't matter what the age is, haven't focused that it shouldn't be happening. They're like, oh, this is just the cost of doing business. Like, this is just like how it is. And it's all about resilience and mitigation. But it's like, no, let's push back. Who's saying that, who's writing these rules for the internet? Who's saying that this is what this needs to look like? Like, we need to like take control and push back on that. And so that conversation is actually more important to us than passing the laws, but we do like passing laws and we've been successful at it. But that conversation around that is even more important, and bringing people to bear on that. And that's why we want to be a part of the discussion. Very unique position to create products, but also advocate on products, and then also be in like the policy space on the legal aspect. I have great respect for prosecutors. You know, some of my first conversations were, what's the gap? What's missing? What's the proof that they don't have, right? Because that helps when we're building products. Like, we should be building something where we're like, can we capture something where if they have a case, it's going to be helping in prosecution where the user may not know to capture that, but we've got a time date stamp that might help if we get the legal request. And so not having that relationship with prosecutors, we wouldn't have known that, you know, not having this relationship because we're consumer facing with young girls saying, hey, this is how this is going down for 18-year-olds old. It's completely different than how it's going down for my age cohort. And learning that aspect. And so that's why we're just pleased to be part of the conversation. But we are tackling it kind of again in this kind of like multi-pronged approach because behavior change is very important for us. This is not something that I want to live, that we've all lived, of like how long it took for marital rape to be a thing and to be counted, right? How long it took for, and you're in a location that maybe people feel like you shouldn't have been. So whatever harm happened to you, you deserved it, right? Like those things took like 10, 20, 30 years for us to like normalize almost, to be like, oh, that's still considered a harm, no matter what, you know, what you look like, what you were wearing, and what your status was. This is one of these things that we don't want to work on for like 30 years. Like, this is like pretty simple. And that's kind of why we push on this, even though we work on some of these harder issues with many of the group in this room. So that is kind of our stance and why we wanted to be part of the conversation.
Thank you. It's amazing to have you as part of the conversation, you know, because I think as we think about and talk about TFGBV, we think about social media companies, and, you know, those are the ones that are always name dropped. And I think Bumble and dating apps and other types of, you know, apps where you connect online, but then you meet in person, sit at this really crucial space of that online to offline spectrum. So I think, you know, you have so much to add to this conversation. It's so great to have you as part of it. And just one other thing that I wanted to say is the piece on, you know, the behavior change and the gender norms, right? Like, that is such an important piece to it, because that's what underlies all of this. That's what underlies all of gender-based violence. And so really thinking about how we have this conversation around, you know, what does consent look like in a digital space? Yeah. What are the norms, and how do we write policies and laws and regulations around that? So thank you so much. I will now pass it over to Katie Ray Jones, who is the CEO of the National Domestic Violence Hotline.
Thank you. Thank you, Grace Farms, and thank you, UNFPA, for having us here. Buckle up. I have a lot of energy, and I'm going to try to cover a lot in a short period of time. So the National Domestic Violence Hotline, our name is pretty self-explanatory, but people are usually surprised on how busy we are as an organization. So we are 24/7. We serve the United States, territories, and military bases overseas. 3,000 contacts come in every single day to the organization. That's usually when people's mouths drop open. Because of that, we have this unique ability to speak to so many survivors and catch an incredible amount of data. And so because of this, we recently partnered with the White House Gender Policy Council to ask people contacting the hotline about their experiences related to online harassment and abuse. So we hear a lot of traumatic experiences, a lot of graphic information, but as advocates, we were really surprised that 100% of the people who participated had experienced online harassment and abuse. 100%, some form. And obviously our population is people who are in intimate partner relationships most of the time. Occasionally we get some folks who are out of scope in terms of strangers reaching out, not knowing who to call. But this was really staggering to us that in this intimate partner dynamic, the amount of online abuse happening in these relationships 100% of the time. Of those, only 33% were reaching out for help around this element of abuse in the relationship, not categorizing this as a form of abuse and thinking that this was the part that they needed to reach out for. This really speaks to this dynamic of power and control happening in the relationship, but not labeling it. I thought that was really interesting when Peyton talks about the vernacular we use and how do people not think about how to call this, what is this and what's happening. But the physical abuse, we've talked about marital rape and how we begin to have words to be able to label things, particularly as women, we begin to think this is something that needs to prompt me to reach out to help. But online abuse, so many things we normalize. I was struck by the earlier panel, Anita's comments, how many times as CEO of the hotline, I've received rape threats and I've normalized it so much now. I don't even get angry anymore. It's like, there's another one. And my colleague who's sitting here with me when she started at the hotline said, we should get you a security team. And I was like, what, for what? This has happened for 25 years. I've worked in this field, like a security team. So much normalization over violence against women. And it really strikes me that as women and people contacting the hotline, this isn't a form of abuse that people think I need to reach out for help. And women are living in these situations so often. So of those who do reach out for help around online harassment and abuse, they're not contacting experts or subject matter experts, they're contacting their friends and family. And so this prompts us to think through a bystander response, much as we would think through, particularly during the pandemic, when people couldn't reach out safely for help because they were trapped in their homes with their abusive partners. And so when we think about a global coalition and a response to online harassment and abuse, technology facilitated gender-based violence, this casting a net of so much vernacular that we use in this space, survivor-centered responses and thinking through what do survivors truly want. We recently did a law enforcement survey with survivors, and the non-carceral responses, I've said it, is such a critical piece of what survivors are wanting. They want options, not that they're saying they don't want a law enforcement response. They want to have tools in their pocket, options. This is true, what we found on the online harassment abuse survey as well. They want to know that they might want to call law enforcement. They want to know that there might be a community response. They want to know that if they reach out to their friends and family, they're going to know what to do. But most importantly, they want to know that they're going to be believed. And I think as we think about domestic violence in particular, we still run up against that. Survivors are always fearful if they're going to be believed. As a survivor myself, I am a survivor of teenage dating violence. I didn't know that I was a survivor until I actually worked at the hotline as an adult, because I thought a survivor had to be Black and blue, really severely battered woman. And I was in a relationship where the person had put their hands on me, but I didn't walk away with a cut lip or a black eye. I had severe emotional abuse in my relationship. And so when we think about this complexity of online harassment and abuse, we are up against a huge challenge as we think about particularly a younger demographic. We're going into middle schools, and young girls in particular are categorizing jealousy as a form of love, using that in conversations to say, if he's asking where I'm at, this means he loves me. If he wants the passwords to my social media, it means he cares. We are up against a huge transfer in our culture where we need to do a lot of education and communication about what do healthy relationships look like. So when I think about global coalitions and responses, the multidisciplinary approach, which I love the conversation today, all of the different lenses we're wearing to come together to think about the survivor perspective, the academic approach, the legal response, the technology response, what we all bring to this conversation, the optimism, because I think it's very easy to get into the pessimistic place. Lord knows I get there very often, to continue this fight, because I do think we can do it. I used to say I'm going to work myself out of a job, but I'm using Botox now, so that may not happen in this part of my life. So maybe my kids' lives, that we can absolutely do this and not lose faith, because we are good fighters, and we can do it if we continue to be hopeful.
I love that. The hope and balancing that. Yeah, yes, absolutely. Balancing the horrors of this work sometimes, right? And like, it's hard to keep that optimism, that hope, that faith, and appreciate, bringing that back and making sure that we can balance those things here in this conversation as well. So really looking forward to both of those sides. All right. And next we go to Brina Winter, who is Senior Advisor in the U.S. Department of State Office of Global Women's Issues.
Yeah, so thank you. And I don't necessarily envy myself right now. Having just listened to the previous panel, as well as everybody on this panel. My name is Brina. I'm the deputy in the Secretary's Office of Global Women's Issues. We are so grateful, Dr. Canaan, to you for partnering with us, not just on this panel, but really in so many different ways, in so many countries around the world, and with your terrific team, who we love very much. And thank you to Grace Farms for having us here. It's beautiful, and it's a weird dichotomy to be in this beautiful glass enclosed bubble almost, talking about the kinds of protections that we need. My role, for those of you, and I'm actually, I don't necessarily get to speak all that often on panels that mix the domestic and the global. And so I'm learning here just as much as I hope to impart about what we're doing specifically from the State Department. And I'll also talk a little bit about the domestic side as well. But I'm here not just as a State Department employee, but of course as an American, as a mom. I'm listening to you thinking, oh my goodness, I've got to find this rainforest program. And also as a woman. And we were speaking last night, somebody you can't see on the stage right now, we were speaking last night about how none of us who comes to this work necessarily comes to it because we think it's going to pay a lot of money, or be really glamorous, or be really stable even. We come to it normally because we have stories, and we all carry those, whether they're our stories, our mom's stories, our friends' stories, somebody that we love, to use their words, has gone through something like this. So just a little bit about our office, and this is not necessarily a clear talking point, but the best way to describe our office is we are a small but growing. We've gone since January of 21 from 20-ish people to significantly more. And our job and our role is essentially every time a policy comes up, a bilateral meeting comes up, a program that we want to fund goes through review, a diplomatic event, a multilateral negotiation. Our job in my office is to raise our hands and say, but what about women? What about girls? That is our specific mandate. And increasingly, we're also asking about sort of the gendered dynamics of all of this. This administration has approached this issue really differently. In March of 2021, President Biden established the Gender Policy Council that Katie just mentioned. This is really the first ever Gender Policy Council, which also sits at the nexus of the National Economic Council, the National Security Council that Peyton just mentioned her work with, and the Domestic Policy Council. And so we have worked really hand in glove, day after day, minute after minute, I would say even in our sleep, just to see what we can do to really focus gender at the center of our foreign policy and also of our domestic policy. So gender-based violence is obviously part and parcel of that. President Biden obviously was one of the original authors who got VAWA passed back in 1994. And he still talks about that work, and he still talks about wanting to improve all of that work. And somebody, Luna, I believe, mentioned the reauth of VAWA, which I would love to just touch base on really briefly. VAWA, I think, encapsulates
and the progress that we've seen on VAWA encapsulates how much we recognize and that government can be slow. It's not necessarily always immediately responsive, as somebody mentioned earlier. But we are trying to learn and we are trying to do better, and VAWA really encapsulates that. So technology facilitated gender-based violence, a really long word, online harm, online violence, online abuse. VAWA has some new protections this year that were hard fought, but also really, really important. Those include establishing a federal civil cause of action for those who are victims of non-consensual image sharing. It also establishes the requirement for the Attorney General to establish a cybercrime against individuals national strategy. I say that word individuals, really emphasizing that, because we all know that what happens when cybercrimes are perpetuated against a company or the government, we snap right into action. But really focusing the individuals and the individuals' need for protection and almost remedy is really important as well. There's some legislation that hasn't necessarily passed, but that I'm really personally excited about. A really dear friend was the original pen holder on this legislation, so we're all waiting in bated breath to help celebrate her when it does hopefully pass. Which is to, and we're just talking about technology facilitated GBV here, so not necessarily online, but the Safe Connections Act. Some of you are familiar with it, but it's going to allow those who have survived intimate partner violence, who are connected literally financially with their abuser, to be able to separate from their mobile plans without penalty, without delay. My husband actually works at T-Mobile, and so it's been actually a really fun area for us to finally have sort of a professional intersection. I get to harass him now. I get to advocate, I should say. And then really importantly, and some of you in the room and some of you certainly online have participated in this, but we launched, and by we, I really mean this is a domestic issue, but we at the State Department also participate in it, the domestic focused task force on online harassment and abuse. There's a blueprint coming out. We've been listening to especially survivors, but pretty much anybody who will talk to us who works in this space. And I think the blueprint that will come out, and my understanding is that this sort of recommendation blueprint will be for release in early January. You probably know even better than I do what's in it. But we'll take sort of all of these things that are pending in policy and legislation and all of these things that we know should happen, but actually put this is the timeline, this is what we need, this is who needs to do it. Nothing like a good metrics and action plan. So on the global side, just shifting there, and I should say, before I shift to the global, I am positive that my domestic counterparts, including at the GPC, are tuning in right now. I am very happy to give out her contact information if that's of interest. I did check with her beforehand to make sure that that was okay. But so if you have any questions about what some of that actually means here in the United States, please do find me after this. On the on the global side, which is the side of the house that I spend most of my time on, I really want to flag two things. One is we're here, as Dr. Canaan mentioned, right at the end of, or right in the middle, I should say, of the 16 days of activism, right after the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. The State Department, along with our colleagues at USAID, we are really, really proud to be announcing and launching our global gender-based violence strategy. That's going to be happening on Monday. Luna talked earlier about really changing the norms from violence against women to really gender-based violence. And I think that this strategy looks at all of the identities in which really face heightened rates of violence in a really different and unique way. And I say that as one of the people who worked on the original 2012 strategy. So I'm really proud, really excited about that. Monday, 9 a.m. Anybody can, EST, Eastern Standard Time, anybody can tune in. The second thing I want to flag is within that strategy, we obviously take a lens to technology facilitated gender-based violence, but we didn't wait for the strategy necessarily to come out to start trying to take action on that. Last March, we launched at the Commission on the Status of Women, which those of you who are familiar with the UN world will know very well, the Global Partnership for Action to address online harassment and abuse. We call it the Global Partnership. We are now, as of today, with 10 other countries And there are countries who have committed that they're going to work with this, they're going to work in a concerted way with us. We also now have formally our steering committee. UNFPA, of course, is a valued member and leader on that, as well as our advisory group members. And so we are going to be really working and ramping up that work in earnest. And that will follow work along 3 tracks: policy, programming, data. And as a policy person, I'll wrap. I'm sure I'm droning.
We're great on time.
But because everybody's talking about principles and they're talking about shifting, like what we're talking about are gender norms, right? So in terms of policy, what I think are really 3 really important and key things that we are working with 10 other countries, and these are from the global north and the global south. It doesn't matter who you are when you're part of the global partnership. This is what we've agreed. 1, online violence, online harms, online TFGBV, because there's nothing we don't love to acronymize, is a very serious and it's a very gendered issue. And it gets more serious and more targeted and more consistent if you have a louder voice, if you're an activist, if you're a journalist, if you are somebody who doesn't present the way that the other thinks that you should. 2, it's not just a gendered issue and it's not just an individual issue. We are seeing this as an erosion of democracy issue. Somebody said earlier today, I deserve to be able to speak out. Of course you do. That is a fundamental principle of democracy. And the tighter we make our glass bubbles around those who do speak out, the more authority wannabe authoritarians get. Thirdly, we have long, one of the things that we really focus on in my office and have for a long time is economic empowerment. And so we've long talked about the digital divide there. And what we generally mean is that women don't actually have physical access to mobile technologies. They don't have phones, or they might not have the ability to get to a place that has internet. They can't necessarily get their financial information, and they're controlled in some of the way. So we need to continue to bridge that digital gap. But what we also need to recognize and what we also need to invest in is bridging the digital gap. That's not just the physical space, but the space that these people are actually perpetuating, that they are trying to increase rather than decrease the gap. So we've had a lot of, we've had some successes already. We, as the State Department, we're policy focused org. So we have seen some successes, especially in the UN setting, on global norm setting. But we know, and people have highlighted today, that there's a long way to go. So we hear you, we're listening, we actively want to engage. And I'm just really grateful to be here with all of you today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. There was so much good stuff in there. And just one comment that I want to make is, I really appreciate you bringing in that kind of public sphere piece to this problem, right? We know TFGBV is such a critical issue when it comes to domestic violence and even partner violence and what we might think of as kind of the personal or private sphere. It is just as huge of an issue in the public sphere, enabling that freedom of speech and enabling women and LGBTQ people and everyone to have an equal seat at the table in the digital public sphere. And TFGBV is one of the pieces that makes that really difficult, and we need to mitigate that for democracy and all of these other really, really critical pieces. So really exciting to hear about all the work that's being done, and hopefully that helps some of the optimism. Always more work to be done, but it's always nice to know that there's movement. So now, last but not least, I want to pass it off to Nigat Dutt, who is joining us virtually. She's the founder of the Digital Rights Foundation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And while I couldn't join all of you at the Grace Farms, I feel that, this virtual is real while listening to all of you and seeing all of you and some of the familiar faces and friends there. But so much has been resonated to me, honestly, while listening about the hotline, the threats, the challenges around laws, the survivors' stories. And And because this session is around the laws, and we are talking about what's in US, but a little bit about what's happening around the world. And I think it's really important to remember that the majority world is still missing in these important conversations, whether these are around the laws that Global North is making, enacting, or we are progressing towards that. And I'll speak from my own experience. What we have noticed in our advocacy around addressing online gender-based violence for over a decade now, looking into legal remedies for the survivors in Pakistan especially. It's that most often the national legislation addressing tech-facilitated violence has very rarely centered the lived experiences of survivors and victims of online GBV. And that's what we have seen in our own law, which is Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, which was made in the name of protecting young women and girls in the online space against hate speech, abuse, harassment. And that particular law is rather focused on carceral models with overbroad ambits that actually ended up curbing freedom of expression rather than facilitating victims and survivors. And in some cases, the same legislation ends up criminalizing survivors who actually spoke out against their perpetrators in the Me Too movement. And there is like one section which basically criminalize defamation. So it's very important for us to while some new laws are underway in other jurisdictions, to share these lessons learned that we already have, or the global community who has already dealt with the advocacy around these laws, in terms of what to do when states try to make overbroad legislations, which end up, either over-regulating of content or end up violating other fundamental rights of users, especially the vulnerable ones. And I would say that while everything is important, and in not only the regulation and laws, but when we talk about how platforms are performing, context is very important. Context is something that now platforms are also looking into it. I think when we are making laws, that's also very important, that different jurisdictions need to look into it. But also now that UN is taking this up, it's important what different contexts basically say. For instance, in South Asia, what is considered sexually explicit might not map into Western notions and standards, but sometimes mere pictures with members of opposite sex can result in violence from within the family and community. And we have seen so many cases, women being honor killed just because their pictures being spread, not even intimate pictures. And what I feel that despite activists and different folks who have been working on this, raising these issues of contextualization for years, I don't think adequate resources have been given to those efforts, and have been actually absent. And speaking of the laws is really important, and it's important to take into account that there are different contexts, but also different jurisdictions where the rule of law is actually missing or weakened, and with jurisdiction with more state control and power, or places where users have less access to internet or bad access to internet, or due to low digital literacy. Sometimes these social media platforms are actually the only internet that they have seen in their lives. So I think it's important to look into the other solutions as well. The problem is so complex and it's so tricky. And it's for different jurisdiction, the definition of online abuse is different. So I think the solution should be multiple as well. And I think it's important to look into, while holding companies accountable, alongside with the rules and regulations and laws, it's important that the self-regulatory model should be there as well, where the tech companies can hold themselves accountable in a more independent way. There is one model already there, which is Meta's Oversight Board. There are some successes, maybe not many, around content moderation, touching upon some gender issues as well. But that's just, like a drop in the sea. And I think we need more. We need to see like what other platforms are doing, or even what Meta is doing with this one independent oversight board. And I think it's important to acknowledge at the end of the day that this is a complex problem, and it intersecting with larger issues of state and privatized power and patriarchy. It's more complex to address, but at the end of the day, what actually is required is collective action, collective thought process, conversations that we are having at the moment, right now, right here at Grace Farm. And it will take time to deliberate on these issues in an inclusive and participatory manner, but it's happening now. And I think we are getting somewhere while, having these conversations at the global level. While some of us, when we started, no one was talking about this some, 13, 14 years ago. So thank you so much for having these conversations. I look forward to some questions and discussion.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And really appreciated your touch point on, the context and how this can look so different in different places. That's such a critical part of when we're legislating and putting in policies, because those can harm the survivors and victims of this issue. And so we really need to be thoughtful when it comes to those policies and regulations. Okay. So now we have a lot of time for questions, which is really exciting. So I'd love to open it up to the audience, both here and virtually, to ask questions. And, I am the moderator and happy to hand it off to different people, but would also love to open it up as a conversation. So, if you have something to say, please feel free to jump in and add to the conversation. So we'll give it off to the audience. Great.
Hi, thanks so much so far, guys. We do have an online question. We have a question about for the panel, but I think specifically for Nigat as well, about it's somewhat fact-based, but I think it can kind of inform a wider discussion about where people can access the laws, either in the US or in other countries internationally, about that their countries might have for dealing with or have legislation or enforcement against TFGBV, and maybe what that says about access in general to these laws and regulations, either here or in other countries as well.
Nigat, please go ahead. I think that question was for you, but then we can also pass it off over here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was also related to the US relevant laws and regulation in US as well. But I mean, with regards to the Pakistani law that I've just spoken about, is like available on our on Digital Rights Foundation website. So much work has been done under that by organizations like DRF, or even Hira, who actually moderated earlier panel. She and her team, Chan, has looked into that one and sort of, worked around that and spread awareness around how survivors can use legal remedies under that law. But at the same time, I would say that that's not really a good model. I think I can share some lessons learned around that, and the gaps that we have identified is that you make a law, but what happens after the law? The survivors are still very hesitant to go to the law enforcement and seek legal remedy there, because they are scared of, their data even being exploited by the law enforcement because there is no data protection law. So that's why I said that's so complex. There's so many layers of complexities, but also if the protection is not there overall for the survivor, and if it's not set, that laws are not centered around victims, then in some societies survivors are even hesitant to use that kind of legal remedy. And I would say that, for instance, female journalists in Pakistan face a lot of trolling, massive trolling, targeted one, and they are just hesitant to use that law because they are scared that if they will go to the law enforcement, it might be used against them. The problematic provisions that I have mentioned, but we have a cyber harassment helpline, and we are doing our best. I was listening to my fellow panelist who was talking about, like the threats around even running the helpline or hotline, and I was just thinking that the kind of threats that we face in Pakistan while on the ground running the helpline, every single day, I face a lot of trolling and hate just because that, we have like some support mechanism available to survivors, which kind of hurts the patriarchy and the closed society that we have. And I have normalized it so much. It's happening to me, but I have normalized because I'm like, well, it's happening every day. We shouldn't really normalize it, even if it's happening to us. So just to mention that there are good models out there, there are bad models. And I think, like we have a helpline where we try to provide as much help and support that we can to the survivors in Pakistan. But other panelists can talk about the resources available in their own jurisdictions.
Awesome. I also wanted to bring Nancy and Katie into this maybe to see if, you're kind of in contact with the survivors and the victims in the context of the legal and policy regulations around, what they've experienced. So curious whether you can speak to what that's like. Are there resources that exist that you can point them to kind of help educate them and empower them in this space? And Katie, before they get to that point.
So from my perspective, I think the big focus in our office has been having an elevated role for our victim witness unit, so that they are involved from the moment the case is opened, and they stay connected with those victims through well past the case being over, so they have a support network. That's the positive stuff. On the negative side, I have to say what I'm faced with on a regular basis right now is that the laws have changed and there is really no finality to a sentence. So we may, help a victim for 2 years to get to a, what we hope is a just moment in the courtroom. And we hope that they can now, move on. Because the moment they're sentenced, even if we've been able to negotiate no further appeals, they can then file a motion for compassionate release. And there is no limit to the number of motions for compassionate release. So we see victims who have to come back and re-discuss the harms that they've suffered over and over and over again. And that's a change that's happened significantly in the past 4 years, that I used to be able to tell victims they will serve 85% of this sentence. So you do not need to worry about this for, if I got a 10-year sentence, 8.5 years. I can't say that anymore. I say, we will let you know and we'll keep you informed, but at any moment they could file a motion for compassionate release. They can file another petition within the Bureau of Prisons asking to be released. And there used to be a carve out for crimes involving children, and that carve out isn't complete anymore. So, I wish I had a more positive thing to say, but that is something that I've noticed as a real harm that's happening in real time right now, is that these victims don't get finality in court the way they may have before.
Another resource that exists for the United States is womenslaw.org, which you can look up state by state laws. I think what we've been talking about all day is around this particular issue, laws are not keeping pace with what survivors are experiencing. And then if there are laws, the system is failing them if they're choosing that course of action. And then the complexity that Nigat is speaking to is, what do survivors really want on the other side of that, which may not be a criminal justice response as it is. And then if it's an intimate partner relationship, the complexities that exist in those relationships and what the repercussions might be if they go and seek a reporting mechanism. And we heard earlier just around if a person who's causing them harm is notified that they've blocked their number, or what possible safety issues might result from that. Imagine going to the police around an online abuse situation. There's just so many spaces where we're talking about so many safety repercussions around that retaliation. You know, we could be here for a whole nother panel. We're throwing kids into the mix and what's happening around that. And so it's very, very complex, I think, as we think about the safety issues that exist and the choices, if we're thinking on a gender lens, that women are making every single day around their safety to just survive. It's incredibly heartbreaking.
I would add, just because this person wasn't able to be on the panel today for illness reasons, but if you're looking at sort of a compendium of what is on the books, what isn't on the books, what should be on the books, hashtag She Persisted does some really great work, at least globally. So I would look at that.
Absolutely. Awesome. Question, yes.
Thank you so much. Peyton, to what extent has Bumble been approached as a model in the tech space of how to use some of the approaches that you had mentioned? Something as simple as preserving the timestamp seems so interesting. Or maybe conversely, to what extent have you all offered yourselves as a model to others? And then similarly, Katie, how has the hotline been able to sort of embed its information, contact information in new ways, especially as you mentioned with COVID-19, folks being locked down with abusers? Is the hotline able to serve its own information or resources? Are you able to go where people are? Are you able to get on Facebook and on other meta platforms or TikTok? Would love to hear more on both of those fronts. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. I'm not sure, chicken or the egg. I'm not sure if we're going to places more or people are inviting us. I'm not sure which way that goes, but when we get the call, we will go. And then sometimes when we don't get the call, like we knock down a door and like take a seat at that table. So I think there's both. Obviously a lot of room for growth because this is like very new for most folks. And so there's so many rooms that we're not in. There's other rooms that we need to be bringing somebody else into the rooms. I know there's two examples that I'd bring in. And so one is very recently, last month even, we worked on this for over a year. So for several years, we had something called Private Detector, pun intended, and it would blur lewd images when they would show up in the app. And so you would actually click yes or no if you wanted to see it. Again, because we're like, sexually forward and empowered too. Like we're not saying it's what you can and can't do, it's your choice. But this idea of like blurring the image so you don't even that initial, whatever the harm is that you from seeing it, not to mention acting on it, and that you have a choice in it, was something that was our own. We've had that technology for years. And so we worked for a year just last month, obviously on the privacy concerns and tons of reasons. And we open sourced it and we put it out globally to the world specifically. So other organizations, platforms can just copy it and use it, not norm. But that's an example of like how serious we are about it. Is it's not just something that we want on our platform because they're all connected, like all at some point. And that's an example of it. There's some, I just want to highlight too, there's like some beautiful work too, like we came across early Equitas, which is an org, small org, but they like train like kind of like hometown prosecutors on like tech violence and sexual assault. And I just like that idea of like, you've got knowledge and like, how can you share it and multiply it amongst other people so it spreads. And that's an example that's not tech-based, but that's like, hey, this is how we prosecute cases. Here's some of the things that have been issues, and spreading that knowledge, because as you know, very hard to try these type of cases, but being able to share that knowledge. So just because the folks in New York are pretty good, maybe the people who are in Odessa, Texas, don't have that knowledge that are doing as well. How do we share it? And so like, we're kind of, we hope to continue to try to be like the policy and tech kind of place where we can. We're also learning from other people, but share it. But I also just wanted to highlight, like, there's these other neat examples of just sharing knowledge will help this work move forward quicker.
I'll also brag on Bumble because they're one of our partners, and Peyton and I are just randomly on this panel together. This was not our orchestration by any means, but also Bumble trained their college ambassadors on healthy relationships. So over 300 college students were trained on healthy relationships so that they could spread the reach, right? That's incredible impact. And are also now training volunteers to help the hotline with our increased volume. To help us just respond to people who are reaching out. So to answer your question, Rachel, around how were we like planting and embedding? So when we saw the pandemic we knew what was going to happen, like survivors being trapped in their homes, not being able to reach out for help. We knew even being able to text, the person causing them harm would be looking at their phones, their computers. So we were releasing a lot of information from a bystander approach, hoping family and friends would see it and begin to strategize, how can I reach my loved one and get in contact? We saw an uptick in family and friends reaching out to the hotline, asking, how can I get information? How can I reach safely? So we would do a lot of strategies around that with loved ones. The other pieces that I think, the chat function, texting function of the hotline, we can embed that in other platforms as well. Google just launched a new feature where you can search certain terms and our resource pops right up to the top and you can immediately click. We're not privy to what those search terms are. We would love to be, but that doubled our contact volume overnight. So when I say we have 3,000 contacts coming into the organization, that wasn't the case 6 months ago. This new search feature made that happen, which tells us there's a large number of people who are searching certain terms in the United States, indicative of things happening in their home, in their relationships, that is quite scary. But where were they going all of this time? Probably into a deep, dark hole and not getting the resources they need. But the option to immediately connect with an advocate when presented is prompting them to want to speak to someone. And that doubled that contact volume coming in. So I think this is really an interesting space, right? To think about someone wants to connect with a stranger to talk about the most intimate, private details of their life. Has to be an incredibly interesting situation to do that. I mean, I remember when our team came to me and said, Katie, we want to launch texting services. And I said, who in their right mind is going to want to tell their most private details over a text? And then I went home. I did my best. I do my best thinking in the shower. And I said, we should probably try it on. And the very day we launched, a young person said, this is the most private way I can talk to someone in my dorm room next to my roommates. And they don't even know it. It's like, I was wrong. You were right. And it is now our most requested service is texting. And this is where it's at for us. So as much as we can embed chat and texting ability in wherever we can into EAP programs, into other websites, into social media platforms, to give people the opportunity to connect with an advocate, even if it's asking a healthy relationship question, there's no wrong door to get the help you need. It's about getting that connection to information.
We've talked, this is an amazing conversation that talks about, some of the partnerships that you've built with technology companies to have this type of impact. So I want to expand on that question and ask all the panelists, how can governments and civil society really build these relationships with technology companies to advance this work? How can governments and civil society engage on things like content moderation, on expanding reach, and all these other pieces that really need to be addressed very immediately? Anyone can go first.
I can.
Yeah.
No, you go. You can tell us how to approach you.
Having served on both sides of that for decades at this point, I I guess the one flag I would have is I remember like, even in the terrorism context, like, hey, we're gonna go to Silicon Valley, right? And then I remember like tech coming into the, White House to like upgrade it. So I remember all of those journeys and work with some great folks. I remember the one thing that was always a bump in the road is that government didn't really have a good understanding of how technology, so the platforms work or the monetization. And so because of that, sometimes the hammer or scalpel they would use wasn't a necessarily the perfect fit for it. And so the dialogues where government is able to come in a little bit early before it's punitive and dialogue with technology, whether it's on the innovation side, like those creating technology that aren't necessarily in a public facing company is really helpful because that way you don't have something that's a little that doesn't fit well, or also too, so that the conversation is not combative at that point. I just going a little deeper on your question is like, I think that's a first step because it leads to lots of complications. In the global context, we always, Europe is very keen to regulate, maybe the US is slower too, because they're working more on innovation. But those seem to be like the two things that are, going back and forth, but just having a little bit of understanding, especially even like monetization and things like that, because if it's a public facing company, for many, not all, they've got shareholders and board folks. So just really understanding that sometimes you can get a solution or get them to a solution in a way that's quicker and less combative. But then I also, there are places where you just, like harm is a harm, especially when you're working in, children's spaces, and there's no time for that. So I recognize that too.
Yeah. I love this question because I don't know the answer to it. I mean, not that I know the answers to other questions, but I think that this is what the global partnership is really designed to set up and try and do. And I think that part of what our theory of change is let's identify the good actors. And it's no surprise to me that Bumble and that Peyton specifically would be on this panel. Her name, Bumble's name, very well known, at least in the USG context and in the bubble in which we work. So we want to elevate good actors. We want to show that we can have a conversation. I also will admit that there's some work on our end that we need to be doing, right? I certainly don't claim to be a technology expert. I certainly don't claim to understand what different companies have done to monetize different streams of business. Somebody earlier said, and I identified with this immediately, that a lot of my ethos, at least my personal ethos, this is not a USG ethos, I want to make that very clear, is that a lot of these business streams are just bad for humanity. And so I have chosen personally to disengage with certain mechanisms, which just for me have been bad for my mental health, or that keep me up too late doom scrolling, or that I don't want my kids to see me engaging on. That doesn't necessarily make me the most informed consumer or even advocate when I talk to tech companies. And so that's something that we, that me, I won't say we, that I can and should do better. I do think, and I think that the impetus behind something like the global partnership is that if we can, as actors who want to do better, as actors who have constituencies and not consumers as our end goal, if we can create a demand signal at the global level, if we can actually articulate that this is a serious problem, that this is a gendered problem, that it's not just an individual problem, that is a democracy problem. If we can set that as sort of the gold standard, and we're successful in so doing, we have 10 countries on board, we have some of the most important UN players on board, we have an advisory group of basically the who's who are active in this space. My hope is that we can grow that to include the private sector, because we can have, we're the demand signal, we're also consumers, we're also individuals. And if we get a little bit smarter, and if we have people sort of flowing between government and private sector, as is becoming more common, just from an anecdotal perspective, my hope is we can grow that. I think that my personal challenge in that is becoming a more informed advocate, just on my own.
Absolutely. Want to turn over Nancy, Katie, or Nigat, if any of you want to add something to this as well.
I would just say from my perspective, I appreciate that for tech companies, or at least some tech companies, privacy is their model, privacy by design. They want to protect their users' privacy. But it ends up being very difficult for a prosecutorial standpoint. If I have an investigation into a particular sex trafficker and I want to gather some of their data from a tech company, there are some that we can serve process on and know that they won't be alerted. And there are others that the moment that they are served with legal process will want to notify their user. And that's a problem for us. The other is for some, there's a really nice system in place when child sex abuse material is found online and it goes through a referral to NCMEC and NCMEC sends the leads out. For some of those platforms, we can then follow up on those leads, and for others, the count's gone. The minute they make that referral, they shut it down and they get a notification, we've shut down your account. So where they are at home are, deleting whatever they've got. So those types of pieces make, I appreciate the privacy interest of the tech platform, but if I got a time and date stamped photo ever, I would be so excited. We're usually, that's the other thing is if you are providing information to law enforcement pursuant to, legal process, if you could provide it in a way that's a readable format, that would be a huge level. Because sometimes we get stuff and we're trying to piece together when did it come in and what chat would actually go with this. Those pieces would make law enforcement a lot more productive and easier. So.
I would add, echoing Peyton's comments about engaging during the development stage, I think is really key. I think oftentimes we're in a reactive stage and then advocates are saying, did you know that could be used to track someone? Right. Excuse me, and then we're reacting to it. And then I think, when we've engaged sometimes with partners and said, bring us in, we've often been told we've got the expertise. We don't need you. And that's a little disheartening to hear. And then a product comes out and we're like, we could have told you that. And now we're back to a reactive stage. And then I think even as advocates with subject matter expertise, our lens is very different than someone who's choosing to cause harm. So the controversial side of me would say companies need to bring in people who choose to cause harm and say, how would you use this piece of technology to harm someone? Because security systems were given and we said, this is beautiful. And then someone who causes harm used it to lock their person in their home, to use the cameras to track everything they were doing. I would never in a million years to think that until I had to help someone build a safety plan around that. So those are pieces that I think, they exist in your companies, the rates of violence, they're in your company. So we just have to think about on the development side, how is this, I just don't think that way, to your point. We don't think that way. We have to think of how, who are the people who are going to use their talents for evil, not good, on the front end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to turn it over to Nigat as well, if you have anything you want to add.
Yeah, sure. I think as I already mentioned about different jurisdictions and different contexts, and it's very important that civil society or folks who are working specifically on these issues or digital rights in difficult jurisdictions, they are fully resourced. They are organized, and local solutions should also be given the same importance as we are talking about global solutions or the broader solutions. And if they are resourced, they are there to not only address this problem, but also look into what government is doing, how they can be part of those conversations. There's so much free labor that civil society has been doing for these companies and for the government to educate them about the users. So why they are doing this labor when they are not when they don't have resources? So I think this is also an important piece of conversation that we should need to link it to the larger conversation, because if civil society has no power and no resources, they won't be able to hold companies accountable. They won't be able to hold governments accountable when governments will make problematic laws. One another thing that I would say that local solutions like hotlines, they are not only providing services to the survivors or helping them in times of need, but they are also identifying gaps in the existing laws. What is working, what is not working, what are the gaps when survivors or even escalations at our end do not work at the platform level. So the faulty mechanisms, reporting mechanisms when don't work, or faulty products when they don't work for users in the global majority. So I think we can only identify this when we have these solutions, and and we sort of work with the survivors directly. So I think these are very important linkages that we should not forget while having this larger conversation. And when governments talk to the companies, it's important that those conversations are also transparent. We don't know what are the conversations are happening behind the scenes in some jurisdictions where the overregulation is an issue for vulnerable communities like journalists or political dissidents or human rights defenders. So I think it's very important for the government to be transparent and the company to be transparent how they are engaging with each other.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you so much. Marina, you talked about storytelling and that everyone has stories. And we at UNFPA have the Body Right campaign where we put forward stories that are positive success stories. So I guess to all of you, how is storytelling in part of your work? And do you see the value of positive stories? Because a lot of the stories we've been sharing are horrible stories. And so we'd love for all of you to reflect on that.
Sure. We'll go down the line. Oh, please.
Yeah, I share that when I just jumped in because I brings it back to my initial is because we don't only work on online, like we're also bringing people together. The majority of the stories we're telling are these, like we call them success stories or empowerment stories, and they're very point of view from women. So wherever they are socially, et cetera, like that's where that part is very active for Bumble, is because by being woman led, there's so many stories, whether it's someone who met their friends on that, or whether it's someone met a cool business partner, right? Because we have the business or the friends, or someone who met the love of their life, or who realized, why don't date him, girl, right? And like list all the reasons why not to. And they are shared in a very empowering way and trend very popularly on social. And it's all like, are we using them or are they using us? I don't know. But they have such a strong point of view, especially this generation that's coming up. And so it's really interesting we're learning from them of how they're talking about things and what success looks like for them as a woman, whether it's like the ERA or whether it's like what's going on in India or how they want companies to position on Iran, like all of that's like happening like on our platform. The interesting thing is like half of the platform started from like users. Like we didn't say like, oh, you should be friends. They were like, hey, I don't want to date you. Or I have someone or not interested, but I'd like to be friends with you. And that wasn't a business thing that we created. It was happening from them doing social and like organically. And the same thing with the business side. So I think the storytelling is so profound and such a strong part of at least the work that we do. But since I like jumped ahead of my excitement, I
love the excitement.
Well, I mean, storytelling is pretty much what I do in the courtroom. That's, part of it is being able to tell a story. And I would say the positive thing I can tell you is after 20 years in the courtroom, the difference of being able to tell the story to a judge about, for example, violation of a protective order, the reception today and the understanding of what that means is so different than it was 20 years ago. So I can really see a huge difference. The judges understand what that means. The probation officers elevate those concerns quickly. The prosecutors identify that this is a bigger issue than just that one interaction that we know about. Let's dig in deeper. So to see that change over the 20 years is a really big positive for us.
So we use a lot of storytelling at the hotline, specifically from a secondary trauma prevention and healing standpoint. So an interesting space when working at the local level, I usually knew what happened to the women in shelter or in counseling services. I knew the outcome. In a hotline, we don't know what happens. It's confidential. Sometimes the call disconnects in the middle. We don't know what happens. So we actually train advocates not to read headlines and think, did I talk to that person in Phoenix, Arizona? Did I do something wrong? We don't want them to go down that space. So we get thank you letters and we share that across the lines as much as possible. So there's one that it always sticks with me. And I'm gonna cry because I still cry. And I've told this story probably 1,000 times at this point. But a woman had wrote a letter. She actually sent an email in the middle of the night. And she said that she'd been calling the hotline for 10 years. I don't know why it still gets me all for 10 years. And she was leaving that night with her daughter and one suitcase. And she was thanking all the advocates who had been with her over the last 10 years for not giving up on her and for believing in her. And tonight was the night she had the courage to leave. And that's the beauty of the hotline, that it is a space for being non-judgmental, for not giving up, and for being there. So when the person is ready, we'll be there for you.
Oh, I hate to be the rain cloud in this party, because the story that just immediately jumped to mind when I think about this work specifically is not my story. It's a story of a very close friend who, and I won't necessarily name her, but she has written about it publicly, so I don't mind sharing the story. But she sort of had a moment of spotlight earlier this year when it came to Iran-based activism. And she has been targeted and targeted and targeted and targeted and targeted. And you can imagine what it looks like when somebody maybe from the manosphere, as it was termed earlier, does it. But if it's in any way connected to a state-run government, how much more that ramps up. And we thought sort of that this story, she has had to move, she has had to move her relatives, she had to do safety plans for her staff. She has gone through really significant trauma. She's not sleeping. It's been a couple months. She still hasn't slept. And the story was supposed to have a happy ending because she just happened to have access to some of these privileged circles where she asked. I'm going to also not name this person, but somebody very, very senior at a very, very broad tech company directly. These things are all triggers, but targeted death threats are not. I have received all of these death threats. I have been told in numerous occasions in very detailed ways how I'm going to be raped, how my mother's going to be raped, how my family is going to be raped to death, what has happened. And this person took in the question and said, we're going to get back on it, and took that home and was very active in responding for about a week. And then it's been silent. And that's what we can't have. We can't have this conversation today where we're all really focused on these issues and then go silent to the people who bring the stories to us. Any good?
Yeah. So Katie, thank you so much for sharing that. It actually resonates a lot because of dealing with survivors on our helpline every day and really complex cases. And I believe that when you tell stories, and positive stories, it empower others to speak up, especially in closed societies. In one of the cases a year or 2 years ago, I don't exactly remember, but it's also very hard for us to, because the hotline is confidential. There are so many privacy issues in Pakistan for the survivors. We do not ask survivors to tell their stories if they want to go public or not. And but there was this one young girl who reached out to us when her intimate images were disseminated by her ex-partner. And as you know, in societies like ours, these relationships are not known to the family or community, and it's always in the in the secret. And but when this was spread, her family came to know about this. She didn't know what to do. She tried to commit suicide. Her friend reached out to the helpline and convinced her to speak to us, and we spoke to her, for so many days. We took up her case under the same law with the Federal Investigation Agency. For that case for several months. The perpetrator was finally charged under the same law and put behind the bars. And that girl actually who really didn't want to seek any support and help, decided to tell her story to the world and chose online gender-based violence as her art project in her master's class. And when that art project was completed, she had an exhibition in Karachi and invited so many people, including us and the helpline team, and put all the resources out there through art, that how survivors can seek support when they face such kind of issues in Pakistan, and invited us. We are based in Lahore, so we couldn't travel there, but it made us so happy that and it empowered so many other women, and they reached out to us and they told us that how that particular story empowered them, that they can also speak up and they can also reach out to the support if support is available to them. And it also helped them talking to the community around them, to their families. And sometimes it also helps us to encourage law enforcement to do better and judges to interpret laws in a progressive way. So that's the story that I'm really proud of.
Awesome. And I would actually like to answer this question too before we wrap up. I was in South Africa as part of my work for USAID just a couple of weeks ago, and we were doing site visits for a program that trains women to be truck drivers and trains them as entrepreneurs in the transportation industry. And part of the program is to, educate them on gender-based violence, prevent gender-based violence in their communities and their homes. And the partner who runs this program had told us these stories of many of the women who were taking these courses and taking these trainings. And, there was one in particular that just came from this absolutely horrendous home life, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, physical abuse. It just was absolutely terrible. And, as we were talking to this woman and the rest of the women in her class, some of them were sharing their backgrounds and their stories. And this woman in particular, who came from this horrible background, didn't share her background story. What she said to us was, this program has inspired me. I want to go to the US. I want to go to Ireland. I want to drive trucks around the world, and I want to see the world. And now I'm going to share. And, I think that those future stories are just as crucial, right? Like, because maybe this is where the world is right now, but this is where we can be, and this is where we need to be, and this is why we do this work. And so I think the storytelling is just so critical to solving these problems and to empowering people to be able to share their own stories. So with that, excuse me, I want to thank our panelists for this just amazing discussion. You all have you've done such amazing work and such important work, and I'm excited to see where the work goes in the future, and see what policies and laws and regulations we can come up with to solve this problem. And thank you to UNFPA and to Grace Foundation. All of this work.
All right. All right, thank you, Sarah. What a way to end us on a hopeful note.
Yes.
You are free to go back into the audience. Thank you for an amazing, amazing discussion. And we're entering the final stage here. We're going to close out, but in using that word close, I want to reinterpret that to it's a beginning really of this conversation. We've heard so much from so many extraordinary speakers, and the stories will continue. So to begin our closing, we are honored to have the U.S. Ambassador to Panama, Mari Carmen Aponte, who couldn't join us here today. She just started her appointment at the end of September, and she's busy in Panama. But she was kind enough to send a pre-recorded statement that we're going to play now, and then we will call Dr. Canaan back up to officially close out today. So with that, I should introduce Mari Carmen. She is a distinguished lawyer. She was the first female Puerto Rican ambassador ever. She was the first president of the Hispanic National Bar, woman president of the Hispanic National Bar Association. She is a first in so many places and in so many sectors. She's a trailblazer, she's a mentor, and a role model for all of us Latina lawyers. There's not a lot of us, there's 1% of us of the lawyers in the US, but she gives us a voice, and her story has inspired so many of us. So with that, I would ask our production team to cue up Mari Carmen's prepared closing remarks.
Hello. Thank you very much to the Grace Farm Foundation, and especially to Sharon Prince and Dr. Natalia Canaan. I'm really very grateful to be here with you today, because in every story, there is a line. There is a lesson in every story, and there is something for each and every one of us. All of us have heard the stories and wonder how they fit in our lives. Stories of violence against women and girls. How do they fit within us? What is it that we can do to help? What is it that we can do to prevent it? Nothing is more important to a victim or a survivor of violence than to be heard. As we go through all our experiences in life, what I have found out throughout my years, both in public service and private life, are three things. People want to know, are you listening? Do I matter? And do I make a difference? The answer we must provide the women and the girls who are talking is that, yes, we are listening. Yes, they do matter. And yes, they do make a difference. The opportunities for us to make a difference in other women's and young girls' lives will come to us. We just have to be able to recognize them. In my case, scarcely 10 days after I arrived in Panama as the next US ambassador to that country, I was presented with such an opportunity, whether I would march and demonstrate on behalf of women and girls and their violence against it. I did go, and I was profoundly changed, profoundly affected positively by this march, and here's why. I noticed several things that really were important. Number one, how young the women were who were the victims of femicide. Number two, how many children they left behind. And number three, how many heartbroken mothers had also suffered the violence and were also left behind. It became very clear to me, as I was privileged to lay a candle for the soul of a woman who had been a victim of femicide, I thought about how I could help avoid and prevent one of these tragedies? Well, I thought, I can listen. I can listen to them, but I can also speak. I can be their voice in strengthening laws. I can be their voice in strengthening policy. And how can I do this? Well, I can join others in their work. And on that day, I chose to join others in a march. So how do we do that? How do we join others in the work? Well, we can know who our allies are, but more importantly, who are the ones that you need to convince and how to go after them to get them to act on behalf of this cause. Well, as we know in the States now, there is a polarized political environment. But we have to go even after those who do not necessarily see things from our point of view. So it is important that relationships be built. And as you become a voice for the women who need our help, we develop relationships even with those who do not agree with us, even with those who do not think like us. That is the answer. We have heard the women who are no longer with us, but we can be their voice. We can be their voice moving forward by making sure that we make allies with some of the most unlikely people in the most unlikely places who are drafting laws and executing policy. It is important that this collaboration be done not only in the States, but that it's also done in our communities and across borders. Because femicide is seen all around the world. The work we all do together can be very helpful and can make a difference. It is important that we collaborate across borders, that we collaborate across communities, that we collaborate across the private and the public sector. And the point, in the end, is to better understand and respond to violence against women and girls. In the words of one of my favorite mystics, Rumi, back 700 years ago, he once said, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other does not make any sense. Thank you for the opportunity to spend some minutes with you today, and know that I join you in hearing the women who are victims of violence, but also in mobilizing to do something to prevent this continuing tragedy from happening all over the world. Thank you.
The virtual is real. Dear participants, far and wide, dear friends, it's been a moment to think about women and girls, about people of color, LGBTI plus people, people with disabilities, people in workplaces, parliamentarians, students, all regularly belong online. It's our internet and everyone belongs there. Today's events certainly inspire new ideas, new ways of thinking. When we look at the problem of digital violence, what we were able to do here was to reaffirm our intention to lift up the importance of safety online, utilizing diverse partnerships. We only succeed when we work together in partnerships, whether individuals, civil society, governments, private sector, everyone. These 16 days against gender-based violence, which really must become 365 days against gender-based violence, are meant to message, to signal that the ideas that we share today must resonate all around the world beyond these walls. Our dedication is critical to bringing an end to digital violence and to changing the way that women and girls and so many others are treated in the virtual world. The virtual indeed is real. It's a space that was created by human imagination. And we can look to the future and imagine and use our creativity to make the virtual space safe and accessible and welcoming for women and girls and everyone. UNFPA remains committed to creating those safe spaces on and offline. And to do that, we have to insist that everyone plays their role, that tech steps up, that men step up to prevent online violence, that we all protect vulnerable groups and end the current culture of impunity. We will have to channel our collective resources, our collective wisdom, our political will into those concrete policies and actions, and to keep spreading the word to propel meaningful, lasting change. And always keep survivors at the center, as we've heard throughout. Let us support victims to understand their rights and to understand and wield their inherent power. And let us be sure that we do everything to bring perpetrators of online violence to justice. I would like to close by thanking every single speaker that shared their expertise. You also shared your passion. And I would like to thank all of you who have been active listeners and questioners, and also adding your knowledge and insights and reflections to the deliberations today, which don't stop here. They continue. We continue these connections. We also continue to connect the dots among all of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, especially the one that asserts the right to gender equality, SDG 5. And of course, we especially thank CEO Sharon Prince and Alina and all of the wonderful people of the Grace Farms Foundation who have co-hosted today's event with UNFPA. For me, it's been great to learn a lot about the actions that we have to take, and some of them rather swiftly. And I've certainly drawn motivation from you all. And it is our virtual space. It's our space for dialogue and interactions. And we intend to do everything we can to make that space safe for grace and for peace. Thank you.